across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock, that'll be. Welcome to the home of common sense. As you've been hearing, white British people will be a minority in 40 years, according to a new report predicting dramatic demographic change driven by immigration. How important is it to retain your culture? Is that important to you? How do you feel about the diminishing predictions for white Brits? We'll have more on that in a few moments' time. Meanwhile, the government's come under fire for blaming migrant crossings on the weather. New figures suggest the Tories' Rwanda scheme did actually have a clear deterrent effect. Too late for all that now. What's Mr Starmer going to do about it? Not a lot is the short answer. And a landmark ruling. A Labour council has been forced to scrap a low-traffic neighbourhood that raked in over £1 million, marking the first time a scheme like this has been shut down by the courts. Thank the Lord. I mean, of course, you don't want people going like Lewis Hamilton round your neck of the woods if you live in a small area of windy roads. But, you know, let's have some common sense on this stuff. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. How important is it to retain your culture? Let me put it like that, because there's so many questions around this. And interestingly, a few weeks ago, before we saw this report, we were going to touch on this because there's been lots of different studies on what the ethnic mix of the United Kingdom is likely to be in the years going forward. I am going to say just before we go any further, and you'll understand why in a second, but we would like to make today Procreation Wednesday. And if you're at home and you're both at home, then we think it will be quite nice to conceive a child while listening to this programme, OK? Just hold that thought for a second and I'll tell you why in just a moment. Oh, I've just got a tweet already. One conception complete. You see, that's how quick Brits roll when they need to. I think it's the wartime mentality, isn't it, really? 0344 499 1000. I find this interesting. White British people will become a minority in the UK in less than 40 years, according to a report. The population of white British people will fall from 73% to 57% by 2050. Most of us will still be alive then, before becoming a minority by 2063. This is Professor Matt Goodwin, Buckingham University. Will be speaking to one of his team on this shortly. Analysed migration, birth and death rates and calculated that by the end of the century, the white British share of the population, those who do not have an immigrant parent, could have dropped by a third. A third. Now, the question is really, how important is this to you? And there's a couple of reasons why I kind of raised that rather sort of obvious point. If, for example, and this is interesting, in the way that almost, is it this country or is it the West? If the good and the great and the left-wing intelligentsia, the Guardian reading massive, was sitting at home watching a BBC 4 documentary about the South American people of Chimbote and discovered that the Chimbote people were likely to become a minority in their own city or their own land by X amount of years' time, then the chattering classes, the limousine lefties would be sitting there saying, this is outrageous, we've got to save this culture. Let's send them some money. The people of Chimbote need some money from us. How else will these poor South Americans be able to... It's important that their culture grows. It's important that they retain their lineage and they are able to tell their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren. We can't have this. Somebody would be starting a GoFundMe page for the people of Chimbote saying, yeah, absolutely right that we make sure. It's outrageous what has happened. The local mayor, some right-wing nut job came in and he opened the floodgates and anybody could move there, and their lovely quiet life that they were living over there in Chimbote has now gone out the window. They don't recognise the terrain. And the left-wing meerkats will be dipping into their pocket to raise money for these people. Yes, absolutely right. It's really important. The cultural continuation of the people of Chimbote is really important. If you apply the same thing over here, people go, nah, it doesn't really matter, does it? It really just makes you a bit of a racist. Bit of a racist if you're worried about your white British race. I don't know why. I am intrigued what's behind it, though, in a case such as this. More texts and tweets coming in, by the way. 7 more conceptions since we have come on air. This is going great. I'll tell you why that is relevant in just a second. So, the report predicts a sharp rise in the proportion of UK population made up by foreign-born or second-generation immigrants, increasing from below 20% to 33.5% within the next 25 years. 25 years, the older you get, you realise how quick the years go past. It also forecasts a near 3 times increase in the number of Muslims living in the UK, suggesting that almost 1 in 5 people living in Britain will be a follower of Islam by the end of the century. Now, if you're a Muslim, you're probably going, that's fantastic. Because that's my culture, that's my thing. So yeah, I'm all right with that. I want wherever I go to grow so I can see the expansion of my faith and the growth of my theology, my ecclesiastical credentials, all of that. I want to see all of that grow. Of course I do. But if you're white British, you'll be seeing the very opposite. It also says by the year 2100, the report expects 60% of people living in the UK to have at least 1 immigrant parent. And now we come down to some of the reasons, which is why this is Procreation Wednesday. The fertility rate. Yeah, I got you on the old horizontal cha-cha-cha, didn't I? The fertility rate for those born in the UK is 1.39. 1.39. It's 1.97 for foreign-born people, so it's more. For Muslims, it's 2.35. So there's the problem. We're not procreating. Our fertility rate is hopeless. We are the Southampton of the fertility rate league. That's us, and we're getting relegated very, very soon. That's how it looks at the moment. That can be changed, which is why we, slightly tongue-in-cheek, asked the question as to why we shouldn't make this Procreation Wednesday. I think it's a darn good idea. Another 17, by the way, have come in the last few moments. Babies being born all over the place, all courtesy of this programme and this report. There is a serious point to all of this, of course, and that is how important is it to retain your culture. Look, the world is a lot smaller than it once was. We were, once all separated people on planet Earth. I get it. The world gets smaller. We have, a kind of global understanding of places far flung that we'd only once maybe read in a book. Now you can go on a package holiday there. People can move around, they meet other people, they work in other places, far-flung areas of the globe which were once uninhabitable, you can now go. So there's all of that, and of course people are going to mix it up a bit on the way. You're never going to get to this point of the 21st century without a few people getting together from other places. So there's that side of it as well, although this isn't exclusively about people having mixed relationships. There's lots in the workings out here. So how important is it to retain your culture? The first thing I can tell you, you should not be criticised for saying you wanted to retain your culture. It's the classic, isn't it? Almost anyone of any other faith or background could say, I want to retain my culture. And I bring you back to the good people of Chimbote in South America. If they wanted to retain their culture and they felt it was being threatened, people would be raising a flag and saying, help these people, they're losing their identity. Why would some people here not have exactly the same view on this? What do you put it down to? What's going on? How do you change it? Should it be even changed? Some people say, no, it's just the way it is, right? Well, I'd like to think that, my forefathers will still be represented in this country in many centuries to come. I don't want that to be an unusual story. I don't want, in 200 years' time, my great-great-grandkids to go on Who Do You Think You Are and reveal to little Joshua, my great-great-great-great-grandson, that did you know, a very interesting revelation. Turns out your dad was white. Wow! Really? Says little Joshua. Me old man was a whitey? Serious? Wow, who would have known? I'd like to think that you can proudly hope that your lineage continues without it making you a dodgepot, a weirdo or a mad racist, right? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on all the big stories of the day, including this. And, of course, Chloe Dobbs is back with us. Chloe, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Lots to get through in this section, of course, including this one as well. I mean, you're white and you're kind of British, but you might be one of those people, and you're a great guest to have on in this respect, that would be within this survey, would be one of those who's not categorised as white British because you've got an immigrant parent.
Yeah, exactly. I would be considered a foreigner in this survey because I've got an American mother. I think the key thing here, though, is regardless of exactly how they calculate it, what this is indicative of is the country heading in a direction where British culture has disappeared. So here we're talking about the number of white British people. Quite frankly, I don't give a damn about the colour of your skin, but I do care about culture. I do care about what your first language is. What language do you speak around your family and in your community? What do you eat? What cultural values do you have? And I think that saying that you think preserving British culture is important doesn't make you racist, doesn't mean that you're saying Britain is superior to the rest of the world. I think that every country has their own unique culture, which they should want to preserve. I mean, why do we go on holiday? Why do we go to different places? If I were to go to India, I'd be pretty disappointed if there wasn't any Indian food and Indian culture. If I went to Mexico and there wasn't any Mexican food, and every country was the same, and every country was just this complete merge of immigrants and different cultures,
Great point.
Then no place would be special. So it's not suggesting that Britain is superior in some way. I do think there are some aspects where our culture is superior to other cultures. So, I mean, you've raised some concerns about Islam there, and a lot of people have concerns about the way that women are treated and think that their sort of moral code hasn't progressed in Islam, and that the religion quite hasn't had its reformation in the way that Christianity has. And those are completely valid concerns to have. So I think that this is very concerning, and it's indicative of a nation that completely has lost control of its borders, and we really need to do something about this, not just because of the practical side of it, like issues with housing and the NHS, but I think that, you know, as Keir Starmer said, we may feel like we're an island of strangers, and we're talking about white British people being a minority across the whole country, but already in this country we have certain areas of the country where white Brits feel like a minority, where you've got immigrant hotspots. So, for example, in places like Birmingham, where you've got really strong Pakistani communities, and the MPs are talking more about building airports in Pakistan than they are about solving the crisis of there being rubbish all over the streets. That is quite concerning. We've got quite a few areas like that, and areas where sectarian politics is really starting to prevail.
Which is why we've introduced Procreation Wednesday here on the programme, Chloe. And I don't know if you heard
how romantic.
Isn't it wonderful?
Whilst listening to talk.
Well, there's no other way, frankly, you know, with my voice and your lug holes. I mean, goodness me, wouldn't be the first time. Of course, there are, as we understand it now, we're just getting the official figures in from the polls. It's looking as if there's, I think, 220 conceptions since we came on air at 1 o'clock.
Oh, my goodness.
So we
must be sexy to listen to.
I think so. I'd like to think between the two of us, we've got this thing covered, Chloe. You know, people are listening, and but they believe that, you know, there's almost a your country needs you moment, right?
I'm not sure whether to be concerned or happy that people are conceiving whilst listening to us.
Well, it's different, isn't it? I mean, there is, you know, it could turn out we'd be like the sort of Barnum and Bailey going around the world, like, you know, these two people that somehow make other people have babies just by being there. You know, it's an amazing godlike power to have, I suppose. But it would be wonderful, because the serious side of that kind of point, joshing aside, is that it is a procreation thing. You know, our birth rate, our fertility rate is very low in comparison to other cultures.
Yeah, I've spoken about immigration, but there is a procreation issue here. Now, I mean, the reality is, I mean, you mentioned that Muslim families have a lot more children. Family values are a much bigger part of their culture and their religion than ours, so they have a lot more children than your typical white Brit will. And if you look at the way that Japan is going, Japan is a place that hasn't been overrun by immigrants like countries in Europe have been, and they have a amazing culture there. I have a few friends that just visited and thought it was amazing, but they are now deciding people are just not having enough children here. So we are going to have to bring in a big surge of immigrants. And it will be very sad to see if Japan completely loses its culture and its identity consequently. But, I don't blame Brits for not wanting to have as many children these days, because I mean, look at the house prices. You need to be a millionaire to be able to afford a house that is big enough for kids to have their own bedrooms and a garden. I wouldn't want to have children if I was in some tiny little flat and I've got 3 kids having to share bunk beds in one room and no garden to play in. That wouldn't be a nice environment. So I understand. So getting a grip on the housing crisis and whatnot is something that has to be done in order to incentivize Brits. I think they're also doing things with the tax system to incentivize people to have children. I know the Hungarians, for example, are doing some great things there. I don't think scrapping the 2-child benefit cap is the way to really incentivize that. I think there are other ways that we can do it that other countries are doing very well. Yeah.
And there is another reality in all of this as well. I don't know what your take is as you're a young female, and that's relevant to this point. You're in your 20s, but apparently one of the reasons why, or one theory is that one of the reasons why fertility rates are low is that over the years, and this is a Western, particularly European kind of theory, is that many women are waiting too long to have kids because the career path has taken over, sometimes by desire, sometimes because, the idea of families or couples living together and only one person working is now ridiculous, whereas once upon a time it was just standard practice. But that's also had an effect. And then women obviously, just by definition, get to a certain age and it becomes tricky to start a family.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different factors at play here, and you've listed some of them there as to why women are waiting until later to have children. I mean, first of all, it is really, really difficult, as I said, not just to buy a house that has enough bedrooms and space for kids, but also to be in a position where if you're a mother, you can actually stay at home and take care of them. I think if I were to have children, I wouldn't want to be working away at work all the time and just handing the kids over to someone else to take care of them. I might want to work part-time or something, but unless I was in a position where I'm able to dedicate the time that I need to bring my kids up properly, I wouldn't want to do it. And then there are a multitude of other reasons. I think that there are a lot of issues with dating with young people. I think dating apps have completely sort of ruined the ability of young people in their 20s and early 30s to form good, long-lasting relationships and whatnot. There's a heck of a lot going on here. It's a complicated issue, but consequently, the number of white Brits is rapidly declining.
Indeed. There's the question. How important is it to retain your culture? Chloe, stay with us. Chloe Dobbs with us on the programme, taking a look at the big stories of the day, particularly that one, 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about Rwanda and Starmer in a few moments' time. Lots to get through. Keep it here. 1:20. This is Talk.
No, I think Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are amongst the most dishonest politicians we've had in our recent history. They just told lie after lie after lie. They said they weren't going to raise taxes. They did. They said they weren't going to take away the winter fuel allowance. They did. They said they were going to smash the boats, the gangs, and the gangs are smashing them. You're seeing absolutely astonishing numbers of people breaking into our country every day. Now they're saying it's all the weather. It's complete nonsense. They've lost control of our borders, as the Defence Secretary at least had the honesty to say on the Sunday media shows himself.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 0344 499 1000. Cliff in Berkshire says, after I find myself somewhat confused. If we push for Blair's dream of multiculturalism, then many cultures should be retained. But if we go for integration, then it's likely that there will be just one shared culture, which won't really be identifiable as any current culture because it will become a real mix and match culture. I'm not a fan of multiculturalism, but I don't think I'm a fan of the alternative, says. That's a very good point, actually. If you take Blair's thinking to its natural conclusion, you sort of don't end up with multiculturalism. And some would argue, slightly conspiratorially, maybe that is sort of the plan. We're all one. Just one thing we have, therefore we lack allegiances in lots of different ways. Or is that a tinfoil hat moment too far? We've got Chloe Dobbs with us, political correspondent and broadcaster. Chloe, let's move on to this story. We sort of saw this coming a mile off. Labour facing ridicule by blaming migrant crossings on the weather because data has shown that the arrivals dropped when the Rwanda asylum scheme was poised to launch, despite record calm red days in the Channel. Let's have a listen to Keir Starmer slating that Rwanda scheme because he hated it. This is him speaking last year.
A much more meaningful deterrent than spraying taxpayers' money up the wall or the ridiculous Rwanda gimmick.
Now, he kind of said that as if the entire world was behind him and then has subsequently come into office with no plan whatsoever on this other than this stupid, rather bizarre smash the gang slogan, which I swear will disappear in about 6 months.
Yeah, that smash the gang slogan was just all talk and no substance. No plan really whatsoever behind it. We were told we were going to get a new border force command, but people are calling that border farce for a reason. Now, you're right that in May and June last year, there were a record number of what we call red days when the weather is good and we expect there to be a surge, but a very low number of crossings. And that is the time when I was in Calais speaking to migrants, and loads of them were saying to me, oh, we're waiting until the general election in the UK because we're scared about Rwanda. We don't want to cross until we know that Keir Starmer has won the election. Yes. Now these people in these camps, they were not knowledgeable enough to realise they could have crossed anyway because Labour were definitely going to win the election, and also the number of people, the percentage of migrants going across the Channel that would have been shipped to Rwanda had it gone ahead would have been tiny, so the chances of it happening would have been low. But they simply weren't knowledgeable to know that, and so they were holding back and waiting until after the general election to cross. And so they were all happy as Larry as soon as Keir Starmer got in and they came across knowing there's absolutely no chance we are going to be deported from the UK. I was very sceptical of the Rwanda plan when the Tories were talking about it and spending a load of money on it, because I thought it's going to be a tiny number of people that they send. Surely this won't be a deterrent. But then when I spoke to people on the ground, it was very clear that it was. And now the numbers are showing that. Look, the rise in the number of crossings, yes, we have had good weather, but there is absolutely no way it can be put down solely to the weather. I think also the French police on those beaches, yes, we have issues with the law about them not being able to go into the water, and hopefully that will change. But I reckon they think the Brits aren't going to hold us to account for the money that they've given us now that Keir Starmer's in charge. He's a soft leader. I think leaders around the world see that, and they're happy to take advantage of the UK and get money out of us and do nothing in return.
Bang on. Spot on as ever. And this also related to Starmer. Senior police chiefs have warned the Prime Minister that Treasury cuts could force stark choices on crime investigations, with fears of a return to frontline policing cuts seen during austerity, of course. Could this also lead to more two-tier policing, which the Prime Minister says still doesn't exist. Let's have a listen to Mr. Starmer on this very point.
There's no two-tier policing. There is policing without fear or favour, exactly as it should be, exactly what I would expect and require. So that is a non-issue. The focus here is not on the apparent motivation of anybody involved in this. This is not protest. This is violence. It's violence on our streets being inflicted and targeted on communities, and we're not going to tolerate that in this country.
So that's sort of where his emphasis and mind is on things, as we know, Chloe. But senior police officers are deadly serious about this. There's a problem hurtling around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of different departments all desperate to ask for more money at a time when they see that the coffers are very tight. It's looking like Rachel Reeves is probably going to have to do something like raise taxes again in the autumn, and departments asking for money, they're going to struggle to get it. But I think that what Labour need to focus on is what is genuinely important to the typical Brit in this country. I think that the safety of our streets is something that is starting to become a very big concern for people in this country, especially people living in cities like London, where they're seeing knife crime going up. Labour also, as well as having a pledge to halve knife crime, they've got a pledge to halve violence against women and girls. If Labour want to have, you know, not yet another broken promise, they probably should make some investment into the police. I think they're making more commitments to spending more money on defence over the past few days. I think that is also something that Brits want to see. So I feel like they're starting to head in the right direction, but we'll see what they say in response to Mark Rowley.
Indeed. And worth bringing in this one just for a moment as well. The White House criticising BBC's Gaza coverage, accusing it of treating Hamas's claims as total truth and repeatedly correcting reports on aid distribution in the conflict zone. Let's have a little listen. This is the very outspoken and rather effective press secretary over there at the White House, Caroline Leavitt. Have a listen to what she said.
Some in the media, we don't take the word of Hamas with total truth. We like to look into it when they speak, unlike the BBC, who had multiple headlines. They wrote, Israeli tank kills 26, Israeli tank kills 21, Israeli gunfire kills 31, Red Cross says 21 people were killed in an aid incident, and then, oh wait, they had to correct and take down their entire story, saying we reviewed the footage and couldn't find any evidence of anything. Oh. Okay, so we're going to look into reports before we confirm them from this podium or before we take action, and I suggest that journalists who actually care about truth do the same.
Now, it's an interesting one, this, Chloe, because we know the BBC have royally cocked up quite a lot on reporting on Israel. I'm not suggesting they stand alone in that one. Unfortunately, I think the White House they could have probably picked lots of stories. They didn't pick the best example because I think that was sort of blown apart slightly in terms of the BBC saying, well, we were just updating a story and we didn't take anything down, etc. She could have picked lots of examples where quite clear, I mean, just show a picture of Jeremy Bowen, for good's sake, and say, this is the problem with news. But nonetheless, it's not a great look for the BBC, is it, to have the White House very publicly and globally saying that your journalism is trash?
Yeah, that was pretty embarrassing. And I think that that White House press secretary is absolutely fantastic. She is so good at her job. And I think it's absolutely hilarious how they will put the mainstream media in their place. We see Donald Trump do it as well. We saw Elon Musk as well do it to the New York Times the other day and have a go at them for their misreporting when they tried to ask him a question. Some people saying he was dodging a question about potentially taking drugs, but I thought his shutdown of them was pretty hilarious. Not a good look for the BBC at all. To not just, you know, there are loads of us commentators and whatnot that complain about the BBC, but to have the White House really go for you like that was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, just a bit. Chloe, thank you for that. Chloe Dobbs, political commentator, with us here on the programme. Thank you to her. We're going to speak to Eric Kaufman shortly, Professor of Woke Origins, University of Buckinghamshire. He was involved in this very report we are talking about. You heard it here just a moment ago. The headlines speak for themselves. White British people will become a minority in the UK in less than 40 years, according to this report. It throws up a whole load of questions, particularly how important is it to retain your culture? I don't think, you know, a lot of the apparent, middle-class elites, the Guardianistas of this world, don't have a problem suggesting that other cultures other than their own should be respected, almost elevated in some senses. And that's a good thing. But when it comes to white British, there's a sort of very different vibe about that. How important is it to you to retain your culture, and what do you make of this report? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots to get through. Over to your calls shortly. It's 25 to 2. So just to reiterate that headline, white British people are predicted to become a minority in the UK within 40 years. This is due to migration, demographic shifts, etc. Research suggesting their proportion will drop from 73% to 57% by 2050. That's a relatively short period of time. And to around 1/3 by the end of the century. So by 2100, or is it 2100, 6 in 10 people in the UK will have immigrant ties. The Muslim population predicted to rise from 7% to 11.2% within 25 years and reaching 19.2% by the end of the century. We'll talk to James Mathewson shortly, former Labour spokesman. But first, Eric Kaufman, Professor of Woke Origins, University of Buckingham. I think you had a hand in this research as well, Eric. I hope that doesn't underplay your role. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yes, no, it was research done by Matt Goodwin at our center. And yeah, so it makes the point really, as you said, that we're going to see dramatic ethnic shifts in Britain with the white British historic ethnic majority, which was as close to 90% around the year 2000, falling below the 50% mark around 2063. So that's a very historic shift in the ethnic composition of Britain.
Many will say, well, look, it's the 21st century. People move around. Years ago, they thought that, a trip to Doncaster was controversial. Now, a trip to anywhere is doable. People move around with work, with jobs, travel, a smaller world, the internet. Everything is kind of slightly more sort of focused on that now. And at this point in the 21st century, every nation around the globe was never going to retain their, if you like, their original kind of origins or ethnicity. It was always going to get mixed up a bit.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an impact of greater global connectedness. It's worth saying, however, that it is only really the Western nations, North America, Western Europe, that have undergone this transformation. And so it's only because they've opened themselves up to substantial non-traditional immigration flows that they have undergone this ethnic change. You know, and this is not hypothetical. Demography is the most predictive of the social sciences. We can look at the under 5 population. And so this is not like an economic forecast. This is very, very likely.
This is actually happening, right?
In
real
look at
time.
London. Yeah, London went from about 87% white British in 1971 to 37% today. So these changes, I think we can expect to happen. They will be affected by the rate of immigration, however. But yes, and I think a country has a right to determine the rate of change that it wants to accept.
100%. And a country shouldn't also apologise, I would have thought, reasonable, that for wanting to retain its sort of indigenous identity, if that's the way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that people make a mistake when they, so if we take two statements, do you have to be white to be British? No. If Britain becomes majority non-white or majority Muslim, is it less British than it was before? Yes. Those two statements are not a contradiction, actually. And people often conflate those two statements. It's also worth saying ethnic minorities do not want to see this change either. In fact, a lot of surveys which suggest they're attached to a historical ethnic composition as well as white people. So they're not in favor of this either. The other thing is to say is that the effects of this have been studied by social scientists. The greater diversity you see is associated with lower trust in your fellow citizens at a local level across the majority of studies. On average, this is so likelihood of returning a wallet, for example, it declines in a more diverse neighborhood compared to a less diverse one. Attachment to neighborhood drops as the neighborhood becomes more diverse. So there are a whole series of social effects that lead to lower trust, and that has to be factored in, I think, to these discussions.
And I guess there's also some sort of irredeemable realities here as well, Eric. Fertility rates are low. Do we have ourselves to blame for this?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that fertility is probably the main driver, the drop. And that's dropped a lot in Britain toward around 1.5 on average per couple. But countries have a choice. Japan and East Asia chose to, okay, we're going to try and use older people. We're going to try and mechanize. We're not going to go for a large immigration strategy to keep growing the population. Countries of the West, North America, Australia, Western Europe have gone to try and maintain or increase their populations, even in the face of low fertility. And I think that's the trade-off. I do think that most British people would rather actually say, we're going to slow down population growth until we can get our fertility back up, rather than saying we're going to keep growing.
But you're never going to get a government, and Keir Starmer likes to give a press conference, of course, and I sometimes wonder when prime ministers of whatever hue or sway want to sort of showcase their personal kind of thing rather than something bigger. But he would never talk about this. He would never stand up and say, look, we've just come into possession of some research that says that white Brits are going to become a minority. We need to do something about it. You'd never hear him say that, and I don't imagine you'd hear many leaders say that.
Well, no, because there's a squeamishness, and I would say this extends even to people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage. They don't really know how to talk about ethnic change. They're happy to talk about we need integration and the impact on employment and public services, but there's a real squeamishness because they don't want to be accused of being a racist. I mean, this all gets back to the expansion and inflation of the term racist. As I said, saying that a country's ethnic composition is an important part of its identity is not the same thing as saying you have to be white to be British. Yeah. And they're not able to make that distinction, and therefore the conversation is just dumb and it's repressed. But it needs to be talked about because these are real effects that have been measured by social science and are going to have an impact on trust and solidarity.
Yeah, trust, solidarity, the whole neighbourly thing, social cohesion, etc. Listen, Eric, great to have you on. Let's speak again because this is really interesting territory. Eric Kaufman, Professor of Woke Origins, University of Buckingham. James Matthewson is with us, former Labour spokesman. James, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us again. I'm going to take a guess here. You didn't study woke origins at the University of Buckingham, but it's just possible you have a view on where we are at. You're a white Brit, as far as I know. I don't know about your parental lineage, but nonetheless, you could become a minority in 40 years. What are your thoughts on that?
I am a white Briton. Ian, I don't know how you guessed it, but I didn't study woke origins. You're absolutely right.
You're full of surprise. You're always full of surprises when you come on here.
What can I say? I don't think most of us did we? But here's the thing. Look, I mean, Eric Goffman as well, who you've just had on, it's important to recognise, is a conservative and did express support for Ron DeSantis in America. He's pretty right-wing when it comes to professors, especially people in university who are traditionally not right-wing. He's pretty right-wing when it comes to professors and their worldview. I disagree with them. You won't be surprised to know. And the reason why is because I'm very concerned about this narrative that is building at the moment. It's building in certain parts of our media. It's building in certain parts of our political discourse. And it's one of ethnic nationalism. And we heard it from Eric there just a moment ago. He said, you don't have to be white to be British. Okay, that's great. That's an established fact. But Britain would be less British if it wasn't white. Those two things can't be true at the same time. That's an oxymoron. It makes absolutely no sense. To me...
But it's a fair point, though, isn't it? If you went to India and didn't see any Indians, I'd be devastated. I wouldn't think I'd been to India.
But the problem here is a complete lack of understanding of history and how the world works. What do we think we are when we talk about how we're British? What do we think we are? Because if you go around these islands and you ask people about their identity, they will give you a million different answers. They will tell you they're English, they'll tell you they're Scottish, they'll tell you they're Northumbrian, as I am. They'll tell you they're from Ireland, they'll tell you they're Irish if they're in Northern Ireland. This is a complex mix of cultures that we have in our United Kingdom, which is why it's a United Kingdom. But none of it is to do with skin colour. And this obsession, Ian, it's very, very concerning, very dangerous. It harps back to the likes of Enoch Powell's speech, about rivers of blood, about the black man having the whip.
Is it really that, though, James? Is it not just a case of... I said at the beginning, you probably wouldn't have heard this, but if you were sitting at home as a proud lefty, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's a democracy, and you were watching a documentary on BBC4 about the subjugated people of Chimbote, a city in Peru, who were being taken over and their culture was being eradicated, you'd probably be starting a crowdfunder for them, thinking this is terrible. These people need to retain their identity. And I can see by that cheeky smile on your face, I'm right.
No, I don't know.
Come on, you would be, James.
I disagree.
You'd be dipping into your pocket. These people have a culture. These people have a way of life. Let them keep it. Don't interrupt it.
What people?
The people I was just referring to, the fictitious documentary.
But when we're talking about non-white people, what are we talking about?
Well, if you were talking about an ethnic race where you felt that the story of their culture was being eradicated or diluted, then you would be the first to be standing up going, do you know what? It's only reasonable that a proud group of people want to retain their lineage.
Exactly the same as I support Irish people defending their language. Exactly the same as I support Scottish people up here in Edinburgh, where I am, supporting Gaelic as a language, because that's been eroded and their culture's been eroded by English opposition for many years. They're the same things that I support. They're white cultures, their skin colour's white, they're of pale complexion. The problem here is, Ian, we're grouping white people as a race and trying to think of them as some kind of culture of their own. It simply is not true. White people are not a culture, they are not a race, and they are not being eroded, we're not being invaded, and the language that's being used is one of a deliberate strategy.
Well, they are being diminished.
Let me finish a second, because the deliberate strategy is one of the great replacement theory, and some of you viewers might not have heard of this, but they should Google it, because it is a deliberate effort by the far right and by right-wing governments around the world to try and scare people into the idea that they're...
Agreed. And I understand that conspiracy theory. I see it come up on my timeline time and time again. This is all deliberate, and Klaus Schwab and goodness knows who else are orchestrating it. I don't buy into that, but there is nonetheless, whatever way or reason we have got here, low fertility rates, more immigration, certain religious faiths having greater idea of a family expansion. That's not a criticism, that's just a reality. If you take Islam or take Muslims, that group is procreating at a greater rate, and the British are way behind. So we could blame Brits.
Not the British, no. Not the British.
Or the white British.
Because my Muslim friends are British. My black friends are British. Because they were born here and they're British.
Okay.
That's not what makes them British.
No, but you're not able to see a distinction there, are you?
I am able to see a distinction between people who are British and not British. Do you hold a British passport? Do you hold a UK passport?
I hold a British passport, yeah.
Yeah, you're British. Great, congratulations. So is anybody else who holds one.
Is that it? Is that it? That's all that defines your Britishness, a passport?
That's how nationality works.
Come on, James, you know that's not true. Would you really tell one of your many Muslim friends that that your only cultural identity is via their passport? They would say, no, I'm much more than that. I am much more than that.
We're talking, right, 3 different things here. Yeah. Nationality, culture, and skin colour. 3 completely separate things. You can interchange all 3
There's
of them.
a Venn diagram there, though.
Yeah, but you could interchange all 3 of them, okay? And still be, you can be a British Muslim with dark skin who lives here in the UK and is culturally British, all right? What do we mean by culturally British? It's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting debate to have.
Okay. Do you not see that there is a cultural component to Islam, for example, that isn't applicable to non-Muslims?
No, because I see arguments all the time. Because if you actually
you don't see that.
Talk to people.
Do you ever go out, James?
Of course I do. And I talk to more people of ethnic disposition than you do, by the sounds of it, Ian.
Probably not.
When you talk to these people, you see that there are debates within those communities. My pals who are of Southeast Asian origin, who are Muslim, are all having debates with each other all the time about, cultural issues and differences in opinion, depending on the way they were raised. It's all different. There are nuances. But this idea that we just simplify it and say there's a great invasion underway and that there'll be less white faces. Why would it be a problem, in theory, that there would be less white faces in Britain if Britain's cultural impact remains the same?
Well, if you were to ask that question to a group of students in a lecture hall, why are there fewer white faces around, then at some point very soon in that debate, someone's going to simply say, objectively, they're going to say, well, that's because there aren't as many of them, and other races, other groups have procreated faster. There's been more immigration. It could be they would be the kind of answers that people would give you, and they'd be reasonable answers. You're saying it doesn't matter.
No, because procreation's a choice. What are we going to start mandating white families to breed?
Well, correct, yes. I mean, we've made today International or National Procreation Wednesday here on the programme.
Wonderful. I'll not be partaking.
Well, you don't have to, James. It is optional, and maybe it's something you prefer to do solo. I don't know. But nonetheless, the issue I was trying to raise is that we've had 217 conceptions since we came on air. So
wow. Well, but I mean, you've got to be careful, Ian, because talkTV's numbers might continue to go down if everyone's off procreating while they're meant to be watching you. But don't do it during your segment, I would say.
Well, you never know. Yeah, I think the phrase you were looking for was up rather than down. But let's not get into that. Listen, James, as always, it's always a bit of a challenge, but it's fun and relatively easy. James Matthewson, thank you, former Labour spokesman with us on the programme. Thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000.
Well, the first 5 years of that so-called Conservative government was a coalition government, which had to deal with the massive legacy of the debt left behind by Labour and the fact that the MOD was overspent by between 39 and 55 billion over the decade. So that had to be dealt with of gross economic and departmental mismanagement. And then, of course, we had the period of the pandemic, which again was extraordinarily difficult.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 10 to 2. This will be Linda down in London. Linda, how you doing?
Hello, Ian.
Hi. Welcome along. What are your thoughts?
So, I think there's two parts to this. I think the first is, what even is white British culture?
Yeah.
And secondly, if we look at this historically, the vast majority of people across the globe, okay, the indigenous populations of almost every country except parts of Europe wouldn't be white anyway. So white people globally are and should be, if we look at it, that we should all keep to our native colours or whatever, shouldn't be white. We should be a minority across the world.
And I understand, I think white is a minority, isn't it, across the world?
I'm not sure. I don't know. But also, I don't know. But I also think that, you know, particularly when we look at, say, Western cultures and America's put in there,
yeah.
Well, if you're not a Native American, then you come from an immigrant family at some point in history. And also, in this country, we have not been predominantly white British Anglo-Saxons since 1066.
But so, from your own perspective, then, are you a white woman?
I am.
Okay. What emphasis do you put on that, if any at all?
I don't think I do. I don't know that. I mean, obviously on forms they ask you what your ethnicity is, so then it's relevant. But other than that, I don't think I really give it a second thought. I'm just a human being trying to do the best I can.
I think that is most of us. But I don't think, you know, if you were, you haven't got to watch many, you know, areas of light entertainment to see that if you were black, for example, you know, going on TV saying I'm black and proud, if you were a guest on the Graham Norton show or something, you know, the audience would give you a round of applause for that. But if you said I'm white and proud, you know, the old Bill would probably show up.
Well, I have to. Can you think of someone that's gone on the Graham Norton show and said they're black and proud and got a round of applause?
I mean, I'm making the point exaggerating the point to make the point, but I don't think there's anything unusual or, by the way, wrong with it. If somebody is black, and I appreciate there's reasons why people of different cultures who've been behind in the past in lots of areas and find themselves in a better place, you would naturally want to champion that cause. But my point is they will champion it often through skin colour.
Absolutely, but I just think when we're talking about, and I think the person you're speaking to before had a very valid point when they said, I think, why do we need to differentiate white British culture? Because
so it should just be British culture.
I think so. So, for example, I'm married to a man whose mother is Spanish, father is English. I don't differentiate him or his mother. I mean, his mum's 94. She's lived here for 70 years.
Yeah.
Other than a very strong accent that she's never lost, she's British and she would describe herself as British. And I just don't. And I think actually, when I see people say, oh, we're losing our British culture and values, whenever I've asked people to tell me, well, what have we lost? No one can ever tell me anything other than to wake up.
There it is. Linda, thank you very much indeed. Great to start off with that one. Thank you. Comments coming in from you. Tony says the Middle East, there are more expats living there than locals. They can live and work there, but they can't get citizenship and cannot get a pension. Does it matter how long they continue into the system? They also have to pay for health insurance. We consider the same way. But I guess that the point that James, our previous guest, and echoed to some degree from Linda there, what is it we need to continue? Is it the British thing or is it the white thing? And does it matter? Does it matter if you went back a couple of thousand years, we might have been more olive-skinned. I'm assuming, you know, if you take the kind of Roman inclusion or incurrence, subjugation, whatever you want to call it, into this country, then that would stand, wouldn't it? And lots of other factors going way before that too. So are we celebrating whiteness or Britishness? Joe's in Leicestershire. Joe, what do you think? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thanks for taking my call.
Pleasure.
I think that we have come so far in women's rights across this country and a lot of westernised countries. And my fear is that the majority of people that we've got coming into this country, well, influxing us at the moment, have completely different views and morals about women than what we do.
Okay.
So if that we are going to end up being the minority in this country, what's going to happen to women? I mean, all the women in Parliament will lose their jobs.
I mean, the previous guy was saying a lot of his friends are Muslim and they're just British, just like him. Now, I don't know quite whether you could apply that template to certain parts of the UK that are heavily ghettoised, and that's not a pejorative, where people do live a sort of separate life, culturally speaking. No problem or hassle to anyone else, but it's very much separate.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the westernised Muslim people, that they're sort of stuck in the middle here, unfortunately, you know, but there are Muslim people and, you know, other races that live in this country that don't want to socialise with English people.
Or don't want to assimilate. Yeah, my guy used to take me back from work, Bangladeshi fella, nicest man you could ever want to meet, most reliable man you could ever want to drive you in a car. He used to say, you know, we keep ourselves to ourselves. There's millions of us living outside Bangladesh, and we do our own thing, we run our own thing, we don't listen much to anything outside our own cultural group. We obey the law, and that's the end of it. Listen, Joe, I stopped there for time. 0344 499 1000. We'll take more calls on this. How important is it to retain your culture or even skin colour, according to this survey? Back with more after the news at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Coming up on 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. As you've been hearing, white British people will be a minority in 40 years, according to a new report predicting dramatic demographic change driven by immigration and falling fertility rates as well. Apparently, us Brits are not enough. And there's the problem. We have declared today as... what did we call it? What was the name we gave it to it earlier? We called it Procreation Wednesday. That was it. We are hoping that during the course of the programme, we will have as many conceptions as possible. We're up to, it's got the data coming through, 378 since we came on air at 1 o'clock. Apparently Scunthorpe's been going great guns. I don't know why the disproportionality there, but we will report back. Meanwhile, the government is under fire for blaming migrant crossings on the weather. As new figures suggest, the Tories' Rwanda plan did actually have a clear deterrent effect. Comment from you on that too. And Rachel Reeves has raised hopes for millions of pensioners by confirming changes to winter fuel payments will kick in this year. But wealthier retirees are unlikely to receive the benefit under the latest shake-up. Thank you for that. Lots to come through on your calls and comments in a few moments. Lines are open. We're asking the question, how important is it to retain your culture? We've also got Kevin Schofield with us. If you ever want to meet a proud Englishman, then Kev can introduce you to one, I'm sure. A proud Scot, if ever there was one, who legged it over this way a few years back, but regularly returns. Like a hero.
I'm going back this weekend, actually, and the weekend after. So there you go.
What was it? There was a Scottish film, Something Hero, wasn't there? What is it?
Local Hero.
Local Hero.
That was a great film.
Was it? Bill
Forsyth.
Bill Forsyth
directed it. Burt Lancaster's in it.
Burt Lancaster.
Very young Peter Capaldi.
Wow, you'd have been very young then.
Very young.
Yeah.
Ricky Fulton. Don't you remember him?
Ricky Fulton, yeah.
That was
This was based on your life.
A real cult classic. That's what I'm going to call my memoirs.
Indeed. Well, when you go back, I mean, the flags do come out, Kevin? You know, there's people with bugles and all sorts. You can't.
Well, the boo anyway. They sound like boo.
That's right. It's the homecoming.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's great to have you with us. Hot-footing it as ever from PMQs. So how was it? Give us your overview then. Did Kemi Badenoch manage to break through, cut through this week? She had a couple of good weeks and then a bit of a wobble last week.
Yeah, she wasn't bad. There was no great sort of sucker punch, or she didn't need to land any knockout blows again. I mean, you get the impression that Keir Starmer sort of is almost disdainful of her, you know, but she doesn't really ever unnerve him in any way. But I mean, her performance was adequate. Her questions were on the winter fuel payment U-turn, which obviously we had that confirmed this morning by Rachel Reeves. So that's a bit of a tricky one for Keir Starmer. Undoubtedly, the government still can't tell us how they're going to pay for it. Still can't tell us how many pensioners are going to get it this year, but they have confirmed that more will get it this winter, but they won't give us any details as to who or how many. So she's pressing him on that, a bit on the two-child benefit cap. Again, he won't confirm whether that's going to be lifted or not. So yeah, it wasn't bad. I'd give her maybe a 7 out of 10.
Okay.
I think.
I mean, the winter fuel thing. I mean, sometimes things are called U-turns when they're not really U-turns. They're just like, you know, a kind of a modification of a policy, etc. But I mean, this is about as a demonstrable example of a U-turn that you could get. I mean, this will be written about in years to come. On the book of U-turns, this will be number one on the list. Yeah,
I mean, it's been less than a year they've been in power, and this has been the totemic policy that everyone knows, and it wasn't even in their manifesto. They announced it, I think, 2 weeks after they got into power. Completely out the blue, we're going to means test winter fuel payments. Anyone on less than around 11,500 of an income, which is obviously...
And that was the problem, wasn't it?
That was the problem.
Where it was set.
Yeah, I think the principle, people agree that millionaire pensioners 100%. Shouldn't be getting a £200 a year or £300 a year payment. But it was the problem was that they took it off 10 million. The vast majority of whom are nowhere near millionaires, and a lot of poor pensioners had it taken off them. So it was coming up on the doorsteps again and again and again. They realised politically it was causing them massive problems, so they've had to U-turn. But the reason that they've given for it is that apparently suddenly we're doing better. The economy's doing better, so we've got more money.
Well, that's
so we
just
can do
nonsense.
But it's nonsense. No one believes it.
The economy isn't doing better.
Well, it's not doing any better. And also this time next week, we'll be talking about the spending review.
Yeah.
And that will involve serious cuts to a lot of Whitehall departments. So you can't, on the one hand, say...
Is that next
Wednesday?
Wednesday. So right after PMQs,
yes.
we'll get some detail.
We'll get the detail on what each department's getting and basically how much of a squeeze there's going to be on public spending. So you can't, on the one hand, be saying we're having to do this, while also saying, oh, but don't worry, we've got money to do this. They realise that they've backed themselves into a corner, they're getting hammered on it, and they just had to U-turn because it was just going to be thrown in their face again and again between now and the next election.
Another question that came up at PMQs was from Reform UK's newest MP. What happened here?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a shock, this one. It had been a rather sleepy PMQs, really, until Sarah Potchin got up and asked the Prime Minister whether he thought Britain should follow the example of countries like France, Belgium, I think he said Denmark as well, and ban the burqa. Right. And it was almost like there was like an audible gasp in the chambers, like...
Not because it was controversial, but because it came out of nowhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not even been discussed for a very long time. It's not been part of political discussion. So, as I say, it came out of left field, and the Prime Minister basically said, well, I'm not going to go down that avenue. He just basically ignored it and then had to go at Nigel Farage as an aside. But what was even more interesting was that afterwards, Reform admitted that it's not their policy either to ban the burqa. What they say is there should be a national debate, and this was about kicking off the debate. But yeah, it was a bit of an odd one, really.
Do you know, it's one of the most fascinating, to me, is one of the most fascinating debates about banning. And I'll tell you why, Kevin, because it actually, curiously, it does unite left and right on not banning it. On the basis of, I think Boris Johnson, despite some of the things he'd written, but I think he said, you know, the idea that a government tells you what to wear is pretty grim.
Yeah.
It's pretty ropey sort of. But then people point to France and places like that and say, well, hang on, they did it. I know it wasn't just the burqa, it was other forms of religious expression or, you know, via clothing or some other accoutrement.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting debate.
No, it is an absolute... You're right. Whereas those on the left would probably say, well, it's racist to tell Muslim women what they can wear. Whereas those on the right would say, well, it's just wrong for the government, as you say, to tell citizens what they can and can't wear. And I think that's where maybe our political culture is maybe a little bit different from France, for instance. I just don't see it as an argument that would get much traction in this country, even from those, you know, on the right of the political spectrum who might, you would imagine, be a little bit tougher on immigration, for instance, still get a little bit queasy at the idea of the government saying what you can't wear.
Else would you have to ban?
Well, that's the other thing. Like
nuns?
Ban nuns?
No, nobody wants to ban a nun, do they?
I don't think there's many votes in that. Really.
There's not a... I mean, there are some...
I
had a couple of mates who grew up and went to Catholic schools where there were some not nice nuns.
Yeah.
NNN, so they were... not nice nuns were... But other than those three, I think that the rest are pretty fine.
Yeah, I think we're pretty relaxed in this country about that type of thing, you know? It's like, you see someone wearing something... Well, I wouldn't wear it myself, but I would defend your right to wear it. You know, I don't think it's not up to a politician to decide what you can and can't wear.
Religious garb is kind of interesting, isn't it? In all respects, not just in terms of what individuals wear, but, you know, if you look into churches and other religious buildings, you look at what people wear. You know, there's a fella standing up there in a frock, and, you know, they were crossing that line before, you know, anybody ever debated it. And before J.K. Rowling had said a word.
And no one even thinks it's odd.
I went to I may have told you this before, Kevin, but I went to a thing at St Paul's Cathedral a few years ago. I got invited on. They said there's going to be two special VIP speakers, but no one was allowed to know who they were. And this fella stood up, some kind of vicary character, and he said, right, now introduce our speakers. Will you please welcome the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the Prime Minister of Australia? And it's like, wow, I thought I was going to see Douglas Murray or something. You know,
yeah. That's quite impressive.
But up they came and all this. But that wasn't the point that really jumped out at me. It was also, there was representatives from about every faith you can imagine sitting in a certain section, sort of Greek Orthodox and Jewish and Muslim, Hindu, literally everyone in a scene in St Paul's Cathedral that, if you captured it, it would have looked like it was 1562.
Yeah.
Everybody was dressed in their own kind of representation of their faith, and it was both wow and what's that all about?
Yeah.
It's a bit of that, you know.
Yeah, it's or when you saw when the Pope was chosen, and you saw all the cardinals obviously all in their gear, or when he became the Pope officially, and there was a big huge international ceremony, and lots of different faiths, representing from different faiths, all in these different garbs, and the idea that they would be banned from dressing in public is just bizarre. So
and would you have to ban the Pope as well? I mean, you can't ban him.
I'd be very against that.
He's got an official visit, but you can't wear that white stuff, mate.
Yeah.
Although he's a hero now. Now he's the only Pope we've ever had who starts his sermons with "How you doing?" which we never had that before, and I think that's something we should embrace, frankly. Long overdue. So yes, we mentioned Rachel Reeves and confirming the U-turn on winter fuel issues on this one. And I just think, just to embroider that a little bit, do we know where the Conservatives are on this? Because the thing that does get forgotten, they had talked about this back in 2017, I think, hadn't they? Or even earlier than that.
Yeah, I mean, there have been... it's been a live debate, there's no doubt about it. I mean, people say, Alan Sugar was always given as the great example, or Richard Branson, why should they be against? So it was always a debate, although no government had really bitten the bullet, and when you see the mess that Labour have got themselves into, you can absolutely see why. The Conservatives' position is it should just be completely brought back, which is the Reform position as well.
Yeah.
It's much easier. And, for the sake of simplicity, it probably would be easier, because there's a suggestion as well, as we don't know whether the government's computer systems are capable of means testing it in such a way that it only goes to non-millionaires, or, those who are deemed to be less than, who are poor enough to be receiving it. So it's much easier, actually, even though
to give it to everyone.
Yeah, although, but they can't do that. And not only that, the Pensions Minister Torsten Bell was in front of a committee this morning in which he very passionately said millionaires should not be getting winter fuel payments. That was very clear. So they're going to have to bring in some sort of threshold somewhere. But as I say, there's some concern, at least, that the government's computer systems, which aren't the best at the best of times, won't be able to cope with it.
I would have thought, though, that now, 21st century AI, that, means testing could happen kind of like in half a second. You'd think.
Yeah, you'd like to think so.
But then we also know that government systems are not as efficient as people like to think they are.
Well, and they're not great at protecting people's data. We've had obviously data breaches as well. So it's something that it can't be rushed into just to get Labour off the hook. It has to be done properly.
Indeed.
And not in too much of a rush.
Here's a couple of stories new in the last hour or so. France finally agreeing to intercept migrant boats. They said they will, give it a go. It's
That's nice of them.
It's nice of them, yeah. We'll give it a go. Well, you have got £500 million.
I was going to say, yeah.
It's not like we're asking for nothing, and it's kind of both of our issues here. The move follows pressure from Yvette Cooper. This was after the weekend, which saw an extraordinary amount of people in nearly 1,200 people in one day. Despite that £500,000, France has stopped fewer than 40% of boats. Its worst performance since the crossings began. Now, some might say, well, that's not a bad... less than 40%? So what's that, 38% or something?
Yeah.
They always say, we're stopping a third of the boats. You just don't hear about that. You
no,
only
of
hear
course.
about the ones that arrive.
Yeah. Well, you think, how many would be coming?
But they've got this policy, haven't they, that if the boat is already in the water and the people are already in the water, and I honestly think that involves people who are just literally paddled into the water.
Shallow water, that's all.
I'm afraid he is in the water.
As soon as they're in the water, they can't go near it. But there was a great picture, wasn't there, from the weekend, that somebody had taken of the French border officers literally standing on the beach watching as these dinghies set off in, I've got images there, of them basically in the water.
Yes.
And they couldn't do anything about it because they can only stop there. There's that great there. It's there.
Well,
They're stopping them.
Who came up with that policy? Even by the standards of another country that clearly doesn't want this problem either. You might think somebody in the meeting would go, is that really the spirit of this law?
Not quite.
Most of us took that to mean if you were like sort of half a mile out, then that is clearly beyond the point that we could rescue you.
Yeah.
But if you're paddling, frankly, I mean...
Exactly. So
some of these lads were going for a snorkel, I think. It didn't even look like they were about to jump on the boat.
It was bizarre. I mean, I wasn't even aware that this rule was in place until the weekend when the government hailed it as some sort of breakthrough that the French had agreed to actually go into the shallow water to stop these boats. So, I mean, if that makes a difference, then we'll just have to wait and see.
And, of course, Emmanuel Macron is due over here July the 8th, I think it is, isn't it? For a
quite soon.
Visit.
Indeed. A lot to talk about there between the two of them.
Do you see, when they always say, we discussed this, I never get... Like, the same way I never understand why a G20 summit is done in, about a day. You think a G20 summit would go on for 6 months.
You think they've got quite a lot of ground to cover.
Every day they'd be at it. You'd be waiting for a sort of papal smoke being released from the chimney to say, yes, we've come to common agreement on this, that and the other. But they all get together down in Cornwall the other year, wasn't it? And they had their powwow, and then sort of half an hour later they had a sandwich and went home again.
And then half of them caught COVID, didn't they? I seem to remember it at the same time.
We gave world leaders COVID. That's one of the things we've given to the world.
Well, Joe Biden was the president at the time. Everyone was worried that we were going to give him COVID and kill him because he was so old. So
that's right.
I remember that was a genuine concern. I remember that. But yeah, no. I mean, they've got a lot of ground to cover, obviously, in this state visit, away from all the Buckingham Palace banquet and what have you. With immigration, obviously, be number one, I would have thought.
I would think so.
Top of the list.
And Boris Johnson, a man of that time, apparently can't win back voters who turn to Farage, according to a poll. Just 15% of Reform UK supporters think Boris Johnson will be a better Prime Minister than Nigel Farage, despite him being seen as the best performing PM. Recent PM, 57% of Reform voters. Farage still beats him head-to-head on popularity.
Yeah, I mean, that will maybe give one or two Tory MPs food for thought. There's definitely a few of them still hanker after Boris Johnson. But the one thing, again, that Nigel Farage is always one stick to beat Boris with is immigration. Again, the numbers, net migration, hit nearly 1 million under Boris Johnson. So much for taking back control of our borders. I mean, 100%. It went in the opposite direction under Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. If the circumstances were ever created whereby Boris Johnson became Tory leader again, then Nigel Farage would have an absolute field day with him on that.
100%. Kevin, thank you. Always good to see you. Kevin Schofield with us, political editor at HuffPost UK. Over to you on those stories and all the other elements we've been discussing as well. 0344 499 1000. How important is it to retain your culture? You might want to dip your toe into the burqa debate as well, which has been raised by Sarah Poachin, the new Reform UK MP. More on that as well. Details to come. It's 2:20 past.
this is an issue where the Prime Minister and his cabinet, his senior politicians, should be talking to the people. We should be having a discussion about this, not some sort of petulant, we don't have blasphemy laws, and then just walking off.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pathetic. It's pathetic.
Well, he lacks the words to speak to people in difficult times, I think. Do you remember after the Southport killings, he turned up to lay a wreath, which was a responsible thing for him to do. But then when those people were sort of protesting on the margin of that and saying, what are you going to do about it, he just walked off. He didn't have the words to talk to them.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It does, this debate about the white British becoming a minority inside the next 40 years. It genuinely, the more you think about this question, because it doesn't mean white people, it means white British. So you could, if you've got an immigrant parent, for example, they could be French or Scandinavian, they could be whiter than white, but not white British. So the question is, which is the bit that matters? Is it the British bit? Is it the white bit? And I think there is a kind of void there that doesn't really get talked about. Can you be white and proud? You can be black and proud. And I think versions of that phrase, black and proud, I mean, I'm kind of slightly dramatising it a bit maybe, but through music and culture, whatever, you wouldn't struggle to hear that said quite a bit, maybe and understandably, that black races in the Western world, you know, let's be honest, have had a flipping battle over the years. No one disputes that. Maybe, you know, we come out the other side, things are looking good, blah, blah, blah. Could be that. So is it the white bit? Is it the British bit? Is it a mixture of all of that? Is it the sense that there is something, not so much that white people are going to be eradicated through some eugenic experiment, but if you have other more dominant cultures that really do live by a culture, I'm talking mostly Islam there, then it's an inevitability that that group of people will grow. Now, you could be Muslim and British, there's lots of British Muslims, whether you are culturally British, whether how you live your life as a Muslim. You know, we know there are segregated areas almost. I don't mean gated, but segregated areas where people do live separate lives. No violence or anything like that, just very separate. So there's about 20,000 different issues to this one, the more you talk about it. Let's speak to Sue in the New Forest on this point. Hello, Sue.
Hello, how are you?
Very good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
Good. Very interesting topic, something that's interested me for a long time.
Yeah.
If you look at me, you'd say elderly lady, British, white. I've got Scottish ancestry. I've also been contacted by people from Denmark because I've got my DNA online and we're all mixed up there. But what interests me most is I've got a B positive blood group, which I found out all came from the Far East.
Is that right?
Years ago, all from the Far East, because...
Are you saying you're an illegal immigrant, Sue, at heart?
I don't know. I don't know how long ago it was.
Wow, we better get the boys round on that.
And the strange thing is that I go tan very easily. People say to me, where have you been? And of course, I've only gone in the garden. I've got the sort of skin that you would associate, you know, with a foreigner probably.
More with the Middle East, yeah. Got it.
Yeah, it is. And of course, I've got a friend who's a chemist who's also Indian. And he said to me, I've got a B positive blood group. He said, we all came from the Far East, even far eastern than where he is.
Yeah.
And he said a lot of us stopped off on the way in the various countries, and most, then went far west, and then we integrated.
Wow.
So that's how it all happened. So although I'm English, I'm mixed up with the Irish and the Scots, etc., and I'm a white English lady, elderly.
What is the bit that, if somebody had to, maybe it's something you never thought about before, so I don't know, but, do you treasure your Britishness, your Englishness, or your whiteness? Is it a mixture of all of that?
Well, I love all my ancestry because I've studied all my tree and I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
But what I love, my husband went to work in China a few years ago and he took photos of the children. They were quite small then. And he showed photos of his new daughter and they all went, Chinese baby. He said, no, she's not. this is mine.
Wow.
But the thing is, they had very Oriental features when they were born, my children.
Yeah.
And now they've grown up. They look very English. But as youngsters, they all...
There was a nod. Yeah.
They looked a little bit like the boys on the slopes of Tibet. You know, and I say, oh, look, I can see the family.
Yeah.
So
100%. I get it. Go on.
I know I haven't got much time with you. I know you want to go. You won't remember this, but at the beginning of COVID, do you remember a man ran into me on the footpath, knocked me down, and all the rest of it?
Yes, I do.
Yes,
Very much,
well,
yes.
It took 4 years to get that sorted. And
wow.
Yeah, anyway, it all came out in the wash and all the rest of it. And one last thing, I said I'm 78. I'm desperate to get to see Iron Maiden soon, and all the tickets are sold out. Is there anybody going to Iron Maiden with a free ticket for a little old lady?
Oh, Sue, that's a wonderful request. I mean, Iron Maiden and Sue in the New Forest. I mean, I think you should be invited on the stage with them, frankly.
The black leather and everything I wear, and the T-shirt, I love them.
Listen, we will. If anyone can help you out, Sue, then we will put that out there. Thank you. That's a lovely, what a very polite request. Sue, thank you very much. So Iron Maiden, I'm assuming from what Sue was saying, they're clearly touring over here. They're probably older than Sue as well. She's 78. Big wish of hers to see Iron Maiden. It's sold out. Anyone got a spare ticket? I don't want any old Silver Surfers over there thinking, oh, Sue sounds nice. And then you take her to an Iron Maiden kind of tribute band down at the Dog and Duck in Peckham. Not quite the same thing. Emma is in Cambridge. Emma, how are you doing?
Hello, Ian. Thanks for taking my call.
It's a pleasure. This is reference to the burqa question.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the burqa because I've had experience wearing one. I lived in Cairo for a while.
Okay.
My PhD was about inhabited cemeteries out there. And in the southern cemeteries, they have these moulids, which are festivals for Sufi saints. And the government's quite... I've been told by my Egyptian friends the government's quite embarrassed about these events. So they don't particularly like foreigners, visitors sort of seeing them. So as part of my research, I wanted to see, and I was interested in what goes on in the cemeteries. Sure. And so I went undercover and I wore a burqa. I borrowed one from a friend of a friend.
Wow, how was that? And that must have been a very strange...
Well, this is my point. There's a few issues about this, surrounding this. First of all, it's possibly the most uncomfortable, unpleasant experience I've ever had in clothing. Yeah. I felt very claustrophobic, very hot, very uncomfortable. It was very heavy. So there's two issues. The second issue is that the fact is I was going undercover, so I could have been anybody. So I've sort of got 3 points. First of all, I do think that it's not so much a matter of religious expression or dress. I do think it's actually a security issue. In that, that's the thing. I could have been anybody.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Secondly, I don't honestly believe that women are choosing to wear these items. I mean, I can't. Maybe they are, but I can't believe it. Given having experience wearing one, it's very unpleasant. And I know that when these women go back to their own private homes, they can take them off. So. That must be an unpleasant. Surely it's an unpleasant thing.
Well, you'd think so. We're here over here, and what's interesting is that there seems to be a sort of real Western pressure on young Muslim girls to wear burqas that they might not have worn in their own country. I remember reading something a few years ago. I can't remember it might have been Qatar or somewhere like that, where there was a surgeon over here arguing something about showing her arms. And surgery and the problem with that, and wondering whether there was a sort of a suitable kind of medical wear that she could have that would respect her right to not have her arms exposed or something. It was something like this. And some sort of professor in Qatar said, blimey, we abolished that kind of ruling like 30 years ago. And here's somebody in the UK trying to advance something that most, for want of a better phrase, most Muslim countries are done away with. And if you look at images of Afghanistan and places, Iran before what happened there, you know, these were fairly liberal places.
It's Egypt. I mean, Cairo, you used to buy it in the 60s, you could buy a beer from a kiosk on the street.
Yeah.
You know,
times have certainly
very
changed.
liberal.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's similar to the sort of zeal of the there's expressions, the zeal of the converted.
Yeah.
In that, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
But I also think that, you know, it's an expression of possibly the most conservative extreme form of Islam. Which, as you say, it's actually few and far between, even in Cairo these days.
Yeah.
And I don't think that has a place in British society.
Yeah, I would go along with that. But then I also come back to the point that we were talking about a second ago. By the way, Sue, Emma, I have to run, but thank you for your call. The point that came up a second ago is, are we comfortable with a government saying you can wear this and you can't wear that? Although Linny makes the point in Stockport, for me, the burqa, the salient issue is about face covering in public spaces. In my view, that should be prohibited. And that is a reasonable point as well. So thoughts on that too? 0344 499 1000. How important is it to retain your culture? We'll talk about Rwanda. Proof, apparently, the Rwanda plan was working. Simon Danchuk, the former Labour MP, now Reform UK member, will join us in a couple of moments. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk 25 to 3. Let's get a thought on this story as well. It's been floating around throughout the course of the day. France set to intercept migrant taxi boats at sea within 300 metres of its beaches to stop crossings to the UK. The new plan will be announced at the Franco-British summit in July. This is during President Macron's state visit. Can't wait for that. Have you got your tickets? Meanwhile, Labour have faced criticism for blaming the record channel crossings on good weather, despite data showing that the Rwanda asylum scheme had actually helped reduce arrivals when the weather was equally as good and the numbers were down. Let's speak with Simon Danchuk, former Labour MP, now Reform UK member, currently in Rwanda as well. Good afternoon to you, Simon.
Good afternoon. It's good to be with you.
As always, nice to have you with us. I mean, there's a couple of points on this story. I mean, the craziness of the French not being able to intercept somebody who was essentially just paddling in the water seemed unbelievable that it ever got to that stage. We've now seen real evidence of this happening, and the French say they're going to stop it.
Yeah, well, we can't rely on the French to stop the illegal immigrants coming into Britain, can we? I mean, we've paid them millions over a number of years now, and they've done nothing to affect the fact that loads of illegal immigrants are coming into Britain, and the numbers are continually going up. Yeah, they have a law that says that they can't intercept illegal immigrants in shallow waters. I mean, it's a complete nonsense. But our laws are as bad, and they're in a very similar predicament to what we are, to be honest.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the French obviously don't want the problem either, and there was always a belief that, you know, the more people that sailed to another country, i.e. us, took a little bit of weight off them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what it is. I was astonished. Myself and my young boys drove around France a couple of years ago, and I mean, the illegal immigration problem that they have is incredibly bad. I mean, there are some towns and cities across France where illegal immigrants are just out there on the streets. I mean, it's much worse than it is in Britain, I have to say. But that's their problem to sort out. We need to sort our problem out. And the Rwanda plan was a deterrent. It was a solution. And that's what we've seen in recent days.
Yeah, and of course, Mr. Starmer and others were very quick to say, you know, we know it was expensive, and nobody suggested it was a sort of a silver bullet solution to everything. But it never really got a chance, did it? And that was the problem with it. And then by the time Mr. Sunak had began to make inroads where he could go ahead with it, he called an election and lost it.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we've seen is that the government attempting to blame the weather for the number of illegal immigrants. 1,200 came over on Saturday alone. It's quite clear under a Labour government you get more illegal immigrants. It's much worse than it was under the Conservatives. But what the figures show, not just about the weather, which is what the government were trying to say, it shows that when the Rwanda plan was first mooted, that pushed figures down because illegal immigrants were worried about coming here and being returned to Rwanda. And then as it was strengthened and they could see that it was going to be implemented under Sunak, then again the numbers dropped. And you'll also remember, Ian, that when these things happened, a lot of illegal immigrants in Britain started presenting into Ireland because they didn't want to be sent to Rwanda.
To Rwanda.
So there's lots of evidence that the Rwanda plan was in fact a deterrent. And fair enough, Sunak struggled to get it through Parliament, etc. But it was Labour MPs that were opposing it, making it more difficult. You can't trust Labour on this issue, I have to say.
Yeah, not at all. And what was interesting is, you know, Mr. Starmer stood up and made lots of speeches on this. You know, he said, we will finally scrap this ridiculous, over-expensive Rwanda plan. And he said it as if he had the sort of weight of support of the entire planet behind him. And spectacularly, classic Starmer, it wasn't replaced with anything. He didn't say, we're going to get rid of it, but don't worry, because we're going to do this instead. He's done absolutely nothing, and we've seen the numbers rise.
Absolutely. He came to power last July, and he scrapped this plan, which was beginning to work. He's wasted a load of money because a lot of money was spent getting it to where it is. And it tells you all you need to know about Starmer. That's the reality of it. He doesn't want a deterrent. He's happy to have open borders. The only plan he did propose was smashing the gangs. Well, Starmer's certainly not smashing the gangs. He's smashing the Labour Party's reputation, I have to say. And there'll be many in the government that aren't happy with that.
100%. Simon, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your time in Rwanda. I know you spend a lot of time there anyway. Simon Danczuk, former Labour MP, former UK now Reform UK member on Rwanda. We will never know what kind of effect it might have had. Even the Rwanda thing, don't get me wrong, I was full-on critical of it because I just couldn't see it was going to work in a meaningful way. I think it would have had a slight deterrent factor. My fear is that if you'd have let it run for a few months, let's say 6 months, so you get half a year of seeing what would happen, the problem in the way that it was set up, and I'm not suggesting I've got all the answers to this, but the problem seemed to me that you would have had very small numbers of people going. You weren't going to be seeing the sort of Braverman dream of, 12 jumbo jets a day taking off. Finally, the hotels emptying. Anyone coming across the channel was taken straight from the beach at Dover over there to Gatwick or any other nearby airport. That wasn't going to happen. And this would have been a problem that would have almost... It would have almost been more embarrassing for Rishi Sunak to have relatively few being deported than none at all, in a way. If it was none at all, at least you can say, well, we never fully tried it. But if that had happened, then I think we might well have seen more people begin to cross the channel, because they'd have thought, oh, look, they're not really deporting anybody. There's only been 48 go in the last 3 months. So it had to, the theory of it could have worked, but it had to work fully and very robustly. It had to be a very hard system. It was meant to be a hard system for people who are coming to a country without any documentation, not coming on humanitarian grounds, not escaping a tyrannical regime, etc. You had to go, no, this is not it's not a smorgasbord of choice out there where you can just simply go, I fancy living in the UK. And I'm not suggesting people didn't want to work or anything like that, but that's not the way an immigration policy should function. If they could have done it robustly, it might have had a chance. White British, being what? How important is it to retain your culture? Interesting one from Matthew, says, how far do we go back to determine who are the indigenous population? For myself, I go back to the year 927. The year England was established as a country. The people of that land were and still are genetically Anglo-Saxons, Vikings and Britons. If that heritage is wiped out in the space of 1 century, then it would be quite sad, in my opinion. Also, for myself, it's not so much the colour of skin, although that is important for anybody, but culture. If Islam becomes the dominant force in the UK, then the entire nation will look completely differently. And some would say, just by definition, it's not even a criticism, it's just a hope and intelligent observation, that it would function differently eventually in lots of different ways. Surely that would just be a general upshot, would it not? But it's interesting that if you go back to 927, when people were still Anglo-Saxon, Viking and Briton, then you can see then that there was this wasn't pure English. I mean, you had other people who nipped over, the Jutes, the Danes, God knows who else, the Normans, Saxons. Everybody had popped over and some of them hung around and stayed. Joanna is in Herefordshire. Joanna, good afternoon to you.
Hello.
Hi, nice to have you with us. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've been listening to these topics now for, weeks, it seems to me, and I just feel like the term British is what's causing the problem. It seems to me that it's a sort of generic term that's used to describe the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, the Northern Irish, and people coming from other cultures can come here and say, I'm British. But if we didn't have the term British, they'd have to say, well, I'm English, and it might sort of catch in the throat somewhat. Or I'm Scottish. It's just this British term. If we could ban the word British, I think it would help. And it might help us keep our identity a bit longer.
That's an interesting one. So some people, though, prefer the word British to English, Scottish or Irish or Welsh?
Well, I don't think it's a preference thing. I think it's a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a term for the collective 4 countries that are our United Kingdom. But it's used by an Afghan family or a Syrian family or an Iranian family to come here, get a British passport and call themselves British. But it doesn't really mean anything. If I was born in China, I wouldn't call myself a China woman. I just think, as I say, the term British, in France you don't have a French term that muddies the water. You're French, but here you're British, and I just think it's a sort of added confusion.
So get rid of the word British and stick to English, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish.
I'd much prefer that. I wish people would say I'm English, or I'm Welsh, or most people do, obviously. And we're not allowed to be nationalistic in England, obviously, but the Scottish are and the Welsh are.
That's a good point. Well, that's for some people, that's why they're more comfortable saying they're British.
Yes, exactly. But I think that should be, stamped out. I think you have to say I'm English. But but people coming, wearing the burqa and walking along the street in Birmingham, and you say, well, what nationality? They say I'm British. If British didn't exist, they'd have to say I'm English. And you're saying, well, that's not what English means to me, and what English means to most of Middle England.
I hear it, Joanne. Thank you very much indeed. In Herefordshire. More from you on the way. This came in from Alison in Kent. He says, apparently there are a few tickets for Iron Maiden still available for the London Stadium on the 28th of June, available via ironmaiden.com, says Alison. So, Sue, in fact, Finn might even call you, Sue, to tell you that, because that's an extra little job for Finn, because that would be nice PR, wouldn't it, if Finn gave Sue a call and said, get over to this website, you might be able to get a ticket. There you go. Either way, I hope you get the ticket, Sue. I really do. Lots to get through. 0344 499 1000. Back with more calls from you coming next on Talk.
We're in a propaganda tornado at the moment, coming from the side, which I think I should. And the reason is that Israel is all of this propaganda is the issue. The reason is that until now, US
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 10 to 3. Just before we return to the phones, it's the Voice of Doom, day 2 of a new voice. Nobody got it yesterday, so it's rolled over to today. Remember, this is the mystery voice that is of a political persuasion. It's either an MP or politician, past or present, dead or alive, or somebody heavily, obviously connected to the world of politics. Have a listen.
Just utterly shocking.
Who is that? If you think you know, 87222, here it is again.
Just utterly shocking.
Hopefully we'll get an answer so it doesn't roll over for too long, although that is, you know, supposedly part of the deal. If we get an answer after the headlines at 3 o'clock, we'll tell you. If not, it rolls over till tomorrow. Here it is one more time.
Just utterly shocking.
Who is that? 87222 is the number. Contact us on that and good luck. We'll find out in about 10-15 minutes time. Let's go back to your calls and comments. This one's from Raj in Liverpool. Raj, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. How about yourself?
Very good, thank you, sir. What are your thoughts?
So I was listening to your program, and I happened to tune in by accident because I said the wrong thing to the car plating.
Okay.
But it was quite an interesting conversation that I dropped into, which was to do with what it means to be British.
Yeah.
So I am actually Sri Lankan by birth, and I grew up in India for various reasons. And then I lived in the Middle East for about 15 years before going back to India to the university. Then went back to the Middle East to work, and by choice, not because for financial reasons or because I was politically motivated, I decided to move to the UK. I came here on invitation of an industry that required me to work here. And I've been here for 10 years now. So what I'm going to say is a lived experience across a dissection, across a cross-section of society and countries. So one of the things is that in all the places that I lived, the one place where I felt I was welcomed when I first arrived here in 2017 was the UK, which interestingly was a crossroad because you were going into the Brexit referendum at that point in time. However, what has happened is since last year's events, I suddenly feel like it's like that movie Inception where they say you're suddenly aware that you don't belong here, which is painful because the last 10 years I've spent.
Wow. When you say, sorry, Raj, just to interject, when you said last year's events, what did you mean by that? The election?
No, last July.
What happened last July?
So the tragic events of last July and the violence that erupted after that.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right.
Yes.
All right. So the riots that took place. So I
aware.
hadn't considered that. I mean, despite the fact that it was a huge story, I hadn't considered that to be such a pivotal moment. But obviously, I'm not qualified to speak on that position. You are. So for you, that was a game changer.
It was because the very night that the event happened in Southport, I walked into my local shop, and for the first time in 10 years, I got racially abused.
No way.
I am a pub-going, British culture embracing, hill climbing, name it.
Tea drinking, tennis playing, all of that.
I don't play tennis.
No, neither
but
should
I do
you.
watch the Wimbledon, and I can have some football banter without getting beaten up.
There you go. Well, that's a struggle for anybody, frankly. Listen, I mean, that is really sad to hear. And I'm surprised that because the Indian culture has been in this country forever. I mean, I worked for an Indian family when I was about 13, 14 after school. And that's, through our NHS, teaching, science, engineering. It's, of all cultures, I would say, visible cultures, if that makes sense, then I would say that the Indian teachers at school, by the way, I would say the Indian culture has never really been controversial in this country.
But Ian, you have to remember, it was not based on my passport or where I was born that people were judging me. It was the color of my skin.
Yeah.
So
I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, that's extraordinary that an event such as that took such a turn, which shows the power of, in this case, misinformation and the kind of detrimental effects. I hope that is a storm rather than anything more permanent than that, Raj, if that makes sense.
Well, it's made me more aware of the fact that, sort of a feeling of I do not belong here. And that was brought to the fore again when what happened in Liverpool last week, as the news was breaking, I shut the door and I sat inside because I was like, this is just going to kick off all over again because of all the comments that were coming in. And then the police made that revelation, which was pivotal. And then suddenly the whole mood changed. But before I run out of time, let me just add one more thing. There was a previous caller here, I believe her name was Joanna, who said something about British. So that goes back to the fact that, there was a 200-year period in time when, for whatever reasons, the British Raj was established across Asia. So there was a sort of looking up to British culture. This is not English. They didn't come in as the English, the English Raj or the Welsh Raj or the Scottish Raj or the Irish Raj.
It was British.
They came in as the British Raj. So it is Britain that is recognized. You know, you look at British Gas, Great British Railway.
I would have thought
the identity.
If you were working in advertising and looking for the kind of key word, I would say it's British rather than the different countries that make up Britain, if that makes sense. Listen, Raj, thank you. I genuinely hope that the sense of instability that you've felt since then, and sometimes I'm sure fear, I hope that goes away as quickly as it came, and it becomes very much a temporary blip, because nobody should be forced to live or feel like that. But you can understand why somebody might, given what was going on with, you know, a relative minority, but a very loud and potent minority it was. Matt's in Cheshire. How you doing, Matt?
Hi, good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon.
Can I just say where I live, Indian people are accepted and integrated part of our society.
And have been for decades, right?
Probably more than any other people on the planet.
Yeah, 100%.
Indian people have been, they're probably the best people that exemplify the
whole notion of immigration, if you like.
As we knew it growing up, not what it is today.
Correct.
Obviously, this is the most serious crisis in 1,000 years of this country. And we have a Labour and Conservative government partly to thank for it, and they should never be forgiven for threatening the demographics of this country. If Britain is not a white Judeo-Christian country, it's not Britain. It's just a random load of people on a piece of land, and anybody that thinks otherwise is not British either. I'm sure there are thousands and millions of immigrants to this country, first-generation West Indians, who would much prefer Britain was a white country so they could have a peaceful, decent life, as they did before recent immigration caused all the problems that we now see today. If I had a political party, I would pledge that Britain would never be less than 70% white British, and all policy should revolve around it. Economics, human rights, culture wars are all irrelevant to save the demographic heart of the nation. At this point, and if these figures are true, throughout the Western world, Russia will be the only white Judeo-Christian country left on the planet that looks after its own people.
And that's interesting, because we did put as part of the question we threw out, Matt, you know, is it the word British, is it the word white? What is the one that you are most fearful of losing, if that's the way to look at this? 0344 499 1000. Thank you to Matt in Cheshire, always a thorough call. Here's the voice of doom.
Just utterly shocking.
Who's that then? 87222. If you think you know, hopefully we get an answer, and we'll tell you on the other side of the news at 3.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. It is the home of Common Sense. So white British people will be a minority in 40 years, according to a new report predicting dramatic demographic change driven by immigration and a lack of procreation. At this end, what is going on? Details on that. How important is it to retain your culture, and how do you define it when it comes? And the more you talk about this, the more we have. We've had great calls on this. The more interesting it is. Is it about your whiteness? Is it about your Britishness? Is it about something else? And what is your sense about those stats going forward? Meanwhile, the government's come under fire for blaming migrant crossings on the weather, as new figures suggest the Tories' Rwanda scheme did have a clear deterrent. Interesting times. And Rachel Reeves has raised hopes of millions of pensioners by confirming changes to winter fuel payments that will kick in this year. Apparently, it's all looking rather good in that respect. And, well, if you're a millionaire, you might be out of pocket. But if you're not, you could be back with your winter fuel payment. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Oh, by the way, we're going to talk about hosepipe bans as well. Yeah, there's one been imposed in a tiny village. Little village banning your hose. What kind of 21st century living is this when they're banning water, for goodness sake? Water firms are warning of more restrictions going forward. And also this is an interesting one. A Labour council, remember who said that? Howard Cox. Not Howard Cox, we're going to talk to him in a moment. I wouldn't ever mix Howard up with Neil Kinnock. He would have probably known the answer. Before we talk to Howard, or even Neil Kinnock, let's do the voice of doom, shall we? This was the voice we played you just before the news.
Just utterly shocking.
Who is that? These are some of the answers we had. Oliver Letwin, no. Steve Baker, Gavin Williamson, Robert Jenrick. None of the above are correct. Chris Philp, however, is also not correct. Sajid Javid, no. Oliver Letwin, it is not. We have not got a right answer. It rolls over to tomorrow. Can we hear the voice again, Sam?
Just utterly shocking.
If you think you know who that is, tomorrow, 2:45, it is back. So, a Labour council. I always feel I have to say that. It's a great Kinnock speech, if you've never seen it, when he's having a pop at the militant tendency. Groundbreaking moment for his party. Anyway, a Labour council has been ordered to scrap an unlawful low-traffic neighbourhood, an LTN, after losing a High Court case. This is Lambeth Council. They were found to have ignored residents' concerns on the West Dulwich zone and have been ordered to pay 35,000 quid in legal fees. Campaigners say the ruling sets a powerful precedent for residents fighting similar battles across the country. Now let's speak to not Neil Kinnock, but Howard Cox. How are you, Howard?
Hello, Ian. Long time no speak.
Long time no speak. You've never knowingly been confused with Neil Kinnock, I would imagine.
I would not. No, not or his Mrs. Glennis. No,
or Glennis for that. Oh, so I was going to say sometimes Glennis on a good day. But you'll remember that speech when they all walked out of the conference, didn't they? And it was I mean, Kinnock, was a lot of things. Not my cup of tea, not your cup of tea. But he was a great speaker, and when he spoke on those kind of issues, he changed the face of his party.
Yeah, and at least he's one of the few socialists that I still, have fond respect for. People like Wesley Benn, him, of course, Harold Wilson. They must be all turning in their graves.
Yeah.
I think Neil's still alive, I think. So.
Neil is still with us, very much so, yes. He sends his best, apparently. But, of course, this isn't about Neil. This is about low-traffic neighbourhoods. Interesting victory. You and I have talked about these forever. They are very, very unpopular in many, many areas. I know there's probably the odd person at number 17 who thinks it's rather great that nobody ever drives past their house again. But they've been it seems they've created more problems than solutions, Howard.
Absolutely right, and this is really is, and I think it is a landmark order, court order on this thing. I never expected it. I thought they might, because it started. They've already been won by the West Dulwich Action Group. They've done a great job, and businesses and local residents have come together. And this is good proof that grassroots campaigns do work. But the thing is, I thought the appeal. I thought, unfortunately, most courts is usually settle for the administration, but no. This is what's happened is we see that this has been thrown out, and more to the point, the over £1 million worth of fines they've asked to be refunded because they are unlawful.
They were, so as I understand it, they were unlawful. This one was certainly unlawful due to a lack of basic consultation. Is that about right?
Oh, well, this is the Lambeth Council, as with everything that is, they're very wedded closely to Sadiq Khan. And as you know, he's not very good at actually taking the voice of public consultations. You know that with the ULEZ extension, which is one reason why, 2 out of 3 people were against the ULEZ extension, but he still went ahead with it.
Still went ahead with it.
And as I said, most Labour councils, I'm afraid, aren't democratic. It's all very well asking. They pay lip service and they tick a few boxes. But when it comes to the result and it comes out, it's a bit like Brexit. No one expected, 50, we're looking at 52-48.
Yes.
No one expected that. It happened, but we adhered to it. Or we hope we will adhere to it. But anyway, it's good news, this is, Ian, and I hope other councils across London and across other urban areas across the country realise they can win this.
Fundamentally, what is wrong with LTNs? We've all got, had mates or even lived ourselves in roads in a big city that are essentially used as rat runs, and, any time between 4 and 6, you can't get out your own driveway because it's just a complete flow of gridlock traffic, and we all moan about it. So it's understandable that there is a problem. Nobody disputes that there's a problem. But the low traffic neighbourhoods were sort of sledgehammers and walnut territory, right?
Absolutely. The principle is right. But the point is, what it does, all it is move the congestion elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's just someone else's problem. This is the classic. We've got to sort out, and I've said this to you, Ian, 150 million times. We need a long-term road user strategy whereby we look at our roads. I took a picture the other day down the embankment. You know it very well, not far from Portcullis House. And it was absolutely chock-a-block. And yet a cycle lane, which is...
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, with his HG vehicle, there wasn't one to be seen in sight. Now, that is costing the nation and the country. It's nothing to do about hate. I'm pro-cycling, but they don't need to have a cycle lane the size of a planet.
Well, that's that stretch of road, as you rightly described, over there from Westminster right the way through to Tower Bridge, the highway and the rest of it. All that neck of the embankment and then into the highway, that neck of the woods, but particularly the embankment, it's kind of reduced the width of a road by around about half, it seems. So you've ended up in this curious... I got stuck in a cab. The cab driver was apologising to me. This was about 12:30 at night. It was bumper to bumper traffic. 12:30 at night. Nothing was moving. The exhaust pipes were doing their duty to the environment because they couldn't go anywhere because they were stuck, fogging up the environment, which would be, I would have thought, one of Sadiq Khan's pet hates, with his ULEZ proclivities. And yet, this was meant to be a more efficient system. These people are pathologically nuts.
This is my point, Ian. I need to get experts around the table from all walks of life, from cyclists all the way to HGV drivers, and realise that let's look at let's do a cost-benefit analysis of these options, like we've done with the 2030 ban and all those sorts of things,
sure.
which I, as you know, I put together with the CEBR economic analysis that shows that the benefits of the cost is 5 times the benefits of the 2030. It's stupid. It's just no one's anti getting things cleaner and making things better for people and all that sort of thing. But you don't do it with draconian, forceful bans or restricting. That we just ask any cab driver. They can write my manifesto if I ever went back into politics because they talk common sense.
Yeah. Are you likely to go back into politics, Howard, on that point?
Thank you. I shouldn't have said that, should I?
No, you left the door wide open for that one, didn't you? But of course, you've been... the one thing about you, I've known you for a while now. You've stood as an MP, you stood as mayoral candidate for Reform UK. You had a moment where you decided, right now, maybe Reform isn't the party for you, and you kind of took a move sideways. I don't think you've had, you know, major stand-up rows with anybody, but you certainly changed your kind of sense or feeling of things. Where's Howard Cox now? Because you've been an incredible campaigner for so many years. Fair Fuel UK. I know lots of others, by the way, have taken credit for that, including big motoring organisations. I saw you having a moan about that the other day, and correctly so. But you know, you have campaigned and you've got a lot to give. So where do we see you next pop up?
You're so kind, Ian. The thing is, for me, is that I was always apolitical in campaigning for the motorist. For 15 years, or 14 and a half years, I was not political whatsoever. But because of the ULEZ issue in London, you know, Richard Tice asked me to come on board and actually stand as mayor, which I did do. I knew I wouldn't win, but I wanted to make a lot of noise about it.
Yeah.
The thing is, for me, I'm so frustrated. I'm 70 years of age and I'm sick to death of what's happening in our country. And I am working closely with people like Ben Habib, very closely, and also Rupert Lowe. So watch this space. I'm not saying I'm coming back, but I do support their aims to try and get something along the lines of something like a Thatcherite approach again. That's what we need.
Yeah, absolutely right. And you mentioned the ULEZ thing. I hope in years to come that kids are taught about the ridiculousness, not to mention the sort of heavy-handed statist way of doing things. If you told our forefathers, even people a couple of decades ago, that they're going to put, firstly, a ring of cameras around London at all, but then they're going to put another ring of cameras around London, and then another ring of cameras around London. We get 3 lots of rings of cameras, be more surveyed than anywhere in China, just by dint of the fact you're driving the wrong car. People would have looked at you and thought you're a conspiracy theorist. They'd have said you're a nutter.
Absolutely right. But obviously my core campaigning at the moment is we've got a certain thing about the fact they're going to raise taxes, and for 15 years I've stopped fuel duty going up.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to win this one in October, but of course I'm campaigning hard for that. And so all of your viewers and listeners, please sign up to fairfueluk.com. It doesn't cost anything. The more numbers we have, the more we can deliver signatures to number 10 to say, let's face it. And don't forget, we're still about the 3rd highest tax drivers in the world.
Yeah.
There's no need to rip off drivers and ruining people's incomes and small businesses, you name it. And, only speaking to a woman this morning who's was really frustrated that the petrol, I told her it's going down. She said, yes, but I still can't afford to get to a hospital appointment, and I can't afford to pay for the parking fee in the hospital.
Yeah, there's the biggie. There's the big one. Listen.
So Ian, that's what I'm doing. I'm campaigning still for the driver.
We will speak very soon and meet up again very soon, Howard, I hope. So great to have you on with us as ever. Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK, with us on the programme. He's a great voice. He's a mate, and it's always good to get a very common sense take on things. And the ULEZ thing. Do you know what? If you ever wanted a greater example of groupthink, it is, because we talk about that quite a lot, where so many things that go wrong in the world are not actually conspiracies. They're because everyone is either a bit intellectually quite lazy to try and make a difference. And it's often much easier to just adopt the status quo than to challenge things or change things. And the ULEZ scheme, which is for those who don't know, outside London, and lots of other cities have similar schemes up and running, Birmingham and elsewhere. But ULEZ in particular was remarkable for this reason. That let's remember that Boris Johnson was the man that was absolutely fine with ULEZ. I mean, congestion charging came in when Ken Livingstone first became mayor, and that in itself was a bit weird. I don't know how much it cost to stick a bank of cameras around the entirety of the capital city, to the point, and I know I've said this many times before, that me and some mates were in a pub and a fella told us a few years before this happened that it was going to happen, and we just thought he was a half-wit and very drunk, because how could you put a wall of cameras around a whole city? Imagine this, you're a bunch of lads in a pub, you get talking to some boffin in the corner who suddenly says, oh, you know what they're going to do? They're going to put cameras around the whole city. It's like, cameras? What, around a whole city? We thought this guy was a lunatic, and then he came out with the money shot. He went, and they're going to take a photograph of everyone's number plate. Really? Yeah? This fella's off his face. What's he on? He's on the Class A's. I know it was Soho, but good Lord. We thought he was nuts. And, of course, they did it. And Ken Livingstone did it, and it carried on, and nobody ever rejected it. And then they brought in ULEZ, and then ULEZ Point 2, which was the expansion of ULEZ, and everybody seemed to go, yeah, that's a good idea, it's tickety-boo. Even, I think, the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London, Susan Hall, I don't think she was fully against getting... She was against getting rid of the extension, was it? But not the other bit. And all of this just to capture a few motorists whose cars won't exist anyway. Just organically, they'll be gone in a few years. I mean, utter horrifying territory. Jaw-dropping amounts of money wasted just because you're driving a bit of a car that doesn't hit or tick a man-made box. We all want a cleaner environment, by the way. We're chatting to Dale Vince later. He definitely wants a cleaner environment. Everybody wants a cleaner environment. Of course we do. I don't think that's the way you go about it necessarily. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The French police will now be able to catch these people in shallow water. I can't go on anymore. It is above my penis. What am I to do? I mean, what an absurd ruling. What an absurd ruling. You know?
It's just ridiculous. Yeah, for 2 years and 3 months, they've been watching the migrant, waving them goodbye, because they've got a law that bans them from paddling in the sea.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Let's have a look at this story. We were touching on the issue of net zero a second ago. James Cleverly, of course, former Foreign Secretary, former Home Secretary, was on this programme just a couple of weeks ago, is warning the Tories not to ditch their green promises, taking aim at Kemi Badenoch's tougher stance on climate policy. He says the UK can grow the economy and go green at the same time. Meanwhile, Labour's Ed Miliband looks set to drop the target for fitting 600,000 heat pumps a year as the party backs away from its 2028 deadline due to budget pressures. Let's speak with the Green entrepreneur Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity, regularly talks with us on these kind of issues. Dale, good afternoon to you.
Yeah, hi Ian, how you doing?
All right, now here's a weird conundrum, because we've been in this territory a couple of times before. They're rare moments, but just like, you know, seeing a shooting star, we should hold on to this, because here we have what I think is you agreeing with a Tory and also quite glad that heat pumps might lose their target, which goes against type. What is going on here, Dale?
Yeah, the world's not black and white, is it? Look, James Cleverly is right. In fact, the biggest growth opportunities are in the green economy. Not only can we grow the economy and do green stuff, it's how we get to grow the economy. I mean, that much is clear from all the studies. And heat pumps, I've been saying for a long time, are just a bad idea. A national program for heat pumps are a bad idea. They work. I've used one for 20 years. But the idea that every home should have one was a Boris Johnson kind of policy, I want to call it that. And he set the target of 600,000 a year. We've been hitting 60,000 a year. At that rate, it'll take 500 years to get the job done.
Wow. So it's really impractical. I know your argument is what comes out of the heat pump is or what comes out of your boiler, etc., is the key issue around this debate.
Well, yeah, it's about heating our homes without carbon. And then the idea is that we all have a heat pump and we all switch to electricity. Yeah. But the problem is, 20% of homes can never have one. Another 20% need expensive intervention to make them work. Bills will go up for most people. We need to build twice as many wind and solar projects to create the extra power. And the net overall cost for the nation is about £300 billion, which is pretty mad.
Yeah. James Cleverly, then, what's going on here, then? Your new best friend, it seems, Dale, because I know that you've been saying, you often have rows on social media and you know, on TV and radio programmes of people who disagree with you. Some people disagree with you very passionately. Some people you disagree with very passionately, blah, blah, blah. But here is James Cleverly saying something that, you have actually been saying for a long, long time, that there is money in or business in their green hills.
Yeah, and look, it used to be the Conservative position until Sunak, I think just before the last election, changed his stance, doubled down on the idea of drilling in the North Sea, and started to distance himself and his party from net zero. And Kemi Badenoch has kind of, picked up on that. Obviously, Reform is saying the same thing. We can't afford net zero, green energy costs more, all this kind of stuff that's not true. James Cleverly is just taking the Tory party back to the future, if you will, because this is how it's always been. There always was a consensus that net zero is good for business as well as being essential.
So in what way is it good for business? Because many people obviously see this as a fairly expensive, almost a vanity project. Ed Miliband, to many people out there, has gone mad on this. And, he's out there spending money, sticking up windmills and solar panels. And, of course, all of that, Dale, and you know what's coming here, it's putting up our energy bills.
Yeah. Ed Miliband's been in charge for 10 months. And actually, he's not done that much. I mean, he's done a lot in some respects. He's unbanned onshore wind. He's unblocked some major solar projects through the planning system and that kind of stuff. But he's not responsible for the gigawatts of capacity that we already have in our country. Nearly 50% of our electricity is green now. And yeah, the latest argument is that green energy is putting up our bills. Absolutely untrue. It's the price of gas that sets the price of our bills, and it drives up the price of the wind and the sun. It absolutely sets them. This is the thing that we've been campaigning for, to break this link. In 2023, for example, the price of gas set the price of wind and sun, and it cost us £43 billion as a nation more than it needed to. 400 quid per household and 30 billion added to business energy bills. So the other thing to say is, of course, green energy is the cheapest form of energy that we can make. And for every pound we invest in renewable energy, we get twice as many jobs and twice the GDP growth as if we invest the same pound in fossil fuel exploration in the North Sea, let's say.
Yeah, but what about when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine? There's always been the kind of the dilemma on this one, that we're up the what's it without a paddle.
Yeah. Well, look, we're 5 years away from getting to, I don't know, I'm going to guess we get to 90% green energy on the grid. There's a lot that we can do in terms of balancing the grid. There's a lot being done already in terms of large scale batteries, demand management, smart systems, that kind of stuff. And the national grid, the people that operate the system itself, they say we can run 100% on green energy. They say that.
There is the nuclear option. I know you're not a fan of that, but I mean, some say, well, that's a clean option as well. It's not drilling for oil. You haven't got to send anyone down a hole in the ground to chisel out coal.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got to send somebody to chisel out uranium, and that's pretty toxic. But that doesn't happen in our country, so maybe we don't need to care about it. But the problem with nuclear is, it's arguably clean at the point of production of the energy, but the toxic waste that, remains deadly to humans for, 8,000 years or something, and that's its half-life. That takes a lot of containing. We're spending, I think the current cost of cleaning up what we already have built is 120 billion pounds. Sizewell, if it comes online, is going to cost 40 to 50 billion pounds. It won't generate a single thing until 2040, but it will put our bills up from the very moment that the button is pressed on the financial go-ahead. That's the new bonkers way to finance a nuclear power station. We don't need them. It'll be the most expensive electricity that we've ever had, and we can't contain the waste for more than 100 years.
What about this issue that there are jobs in this whole green revolution, if you like? I mean, there's many people will understand it, look at this and say, look, let's not kid ourselves. We're not about to take on China when it comes to building solar panels. They've got that thing covered. There might be a couple of firms knocking around that are doing great business, but in terms of the dominance of that world, the Chinese have got it. Similarly with windmills, turbines, whatever phrase somebody wants, that's all pretty much caught up over there in the Chinese economy. So where are the green jobs that we hear a lot about? How will they manifest, Dale? What sort of roles will they be?
Well, there's a lot of jobs in green energy in particular. And right now, the green economy employs twice as many people in our country as the fossil fuel economy does. So that kind of thing, that's already happening. But, the green economy broadly is across energy, transport and food. We need a transition for farmers away from animal farming. That makes room for nature to come back. We're electrifying transport already. Electric cars are taking over the roads. Buses and trucks are coming, and even planes are coming and stuff like that. I mean, they're the same kind of jobs that we have in the old economy. We're talking about engineers, for example, electricians, plumbers, that kind of stuff. Working with different technology.
So this is something you can see not just creating your and others' idea of how a planet should function environmentally, but also economically.
It's primarily an economic opportunity. I don't talk about it in terms of ice caps and polar bears anymore. I haven't done for a few years. It's about jobs and GDP. This is the next industrial revolution, and it's the opportunity of the 21st century to grow our economy, but in a sustainable way. Green energy, for example, is a forever fuel. It will never run out. So the jobs we create are forever jobs, and we get to keep that money in our economy. In a typical year, we spend 50 billion pounds to bring fossil fuels here just to burn them. And that's madness. That's so unsustainable. For that same sum of money, we could be 100% powered by green energy and keep that money in our economy.
Do you imagine James Cleverly is going to make any inroads with Kemi Badenoch? She's sort of in a kind of turmoil on this, really, because she previously would have been signed up to some of this and then realised that Reform UK are chomping at the bit and are hot on the heels. So she's kind of reverted really to a more reform position than the previous one the Conservatives did adopt. And I know you didn't think it was perfect, but it was certainly different to where it is now.
Yeah, I think the problem for me is that you've got people here playing politics with facts and with really important issues for the future of our country. You've got Nigel Farage saying that green energy is putting up the cost of bills. That's untrue. He's saying we can't afford net zero. Also untrue. And Kemi Badenoch, as you say, kind of following his lead. James Cleverly knows what's really what, and Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage are people that are putting their own self-interest and their party's interest before the interest of the country, and I think that's a terrible thing.
Dale, thank you as ever. He is Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity, on that story. I thought it was right. James Cleverly warning the Tories not to ditch their green promises. And this is, you know, Kemi Badenoch's position, well, it's there for all to see. It's not, it doesn't even need explaining, really, does it? You know, she's had the what's-it spooked out of her by Reform UK. And the idea that Kemi is going to take on Nigel Farage in the oratory department or the convincing department is just a nonsense. I mean, she should really just give up, shouldn't she? But is James Cleverly onto something here? Is he on manoeuvres? 0344 499 1000. 3:30, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Come back to your comments on a whole range of stuff, from the question we threw out at the beginning about how important it is to retain your culture. This is reference the report that suggests, and it is, I mean, certainly big food for thought when you read a headline like this: white British people will become a minority in the UK in less than 40 years. This is white British people. So you could be white and non-British, but white Brits. So look at it like that. The population of white Britain will fall from 73% to 57% by 2050 and become a minority by 2063, according to this research. How important is it to you to retain your culture? More comments on that. And this, you normally get one of these stories at some point, but it tends to happen when the weather is stonking and it's an absolute scorcher out there, and suddenly you hear about the hosepipe ban is coming. You don't tend to get it when you've had, well, a little bit of sunshine, and let's face it, last couple of days have been a bit grim, but Britain's first hosepipe ban of the year has been imposed on the Derbyshire village of Yulgrave, where 500 homes must stop watering their gardens and use showers instead of baths. Residents are also urged to cut tap use during peak times, as major water firms warn more restrictions could follow this summer. And this, of course, comes amid a damning review that says the nation's water system is failing and needs a full reset. This is all happening just as Thames Water's £4 billion rescue deal collapses and South West Water's owners report heavy losses. Let's speak with Paul Sims, senior reporter over there at The Sun, who've been reporting on this. Paul, good afternoon to you. I mean, who'd have thought water was ever so sexy? It's making more headlines than it's ever done.
Well, we're essentially obsessed by the weather in this country and have been for decades. It preoccupies us. When it's cold, it's too cold. When it's hot, it's too hot. When we come towards the summer, there is always this talk about whether there's going to be a hosepipe ban. And you talk about the rain that we've had recently, but the figures released recently, the provisional figures at least from the Met Office, show that we've just had the warmest spring since records began in 1910. On top of that, we've had the driest spring in over 50 years. So you'll see and have seen over the last few weeks, a lot of the water companies typically are coming out and starting to roll the pitch. So they're essentially saying unless there is rain on the way, they are going to have to impose a hosepipe ban. And that's also in the context of the Met Office announcement in the last few days that the summer ahead of us is going to be long and hot.
Well, we all hope it is, but I'd still like to water my garden. That's the problem, Paul, isn't it? And we've had this. I know it's not entirely new, but there is a bit of you that thinks, hang on, reality check. It's the 21st century. You know, I go on holiday to Spain and they've got those kind of little sprays that spray 24/7 around the hotel, keeping the lawns all nice and green and the palm trees growing, etc. For some reason, we can't manage that.
No, we can't. The infrastructure just isn't there. It's ancient. And we are seeing our bills, aren't we? They're rising every single year. I've got some figures just next to me in a table that shows that for Southern Water, customers of Southern Water, their bills next year are going to go up by a staggering 47%, from £478 a year to £703. And that is, they will say that is to reinvest into this crumbling infrastructure so that things will get better for us. But it will be the consumer, the customer, who pays through the nose to have that happen. We are just surrounded by a crumbling system. So each year we rely on reservoirs. I mean, Yulgrave, for instance, relies on a spring. So they're not like the main water companies. They rely on the local spring.
And it's interesting because it's not like... It's not like energising your house in the convention. Like if you want to put a solar panel up, you can stick a solar panel up and you get, you know, essentially free energy. And not only that, you can sell it back to your supplier and even get paid for that. But with this, even if you did have a water tank in your back garden, you might be able to spray the lawn with it. But, you know, it's not going to stop. The water company aren't going to go, oh, you're covered, don't worry, we don't need to supply you. It doesn't work like that.
We're entirely reliant on the water companies. We've literally got our hands tied behind our backs, and the bill increases we have to suck up and take on. I mean, the people of Yulgrave are incredibly proud of the fact that they supply their own water via this spring that is 2 miles outside of the village. There's a mine below ground which they use as a secondary source. That is slightly temperamental, which is why they've imposed the hosepipe ban, because they don't want to have to turn towards Severn Trent. Because if they turn to Severn Trent, their bills are going to go through the roof. The last time they had to do it was a couple of years ago, and it cost them an extra £27,000. And it's literally being held to ransom by the water companies because there really is no other alternative for the majority of us, which is why Yulgrave are so protective of their spring source.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that one of the problems stems from the fact, I mean, there's many facets to this, Paul, as you know better than me, but, you know, the reservoir thing, we haven't built one of those for decades, so there's problems around that. You might think the fact we're surrounded by sea would go in our favour for reasons I've never been able to work out. That apparently is a bit of an irrelevance.
A lot of the reservoirs that we have are drying out quicker every single year. I can remember going back to the heat waves of 2018. There was a famous reservoir over near Manchester, and it was so dried out that it essentially turned into a beach. And despite all these warnings that we've had, despite all the experiences of over the last few years, I mean, the Met Office will say that I think it's 7 of the top 10 warmest summers have taken place since 2000. There are warning flags all over the place, and yet we are still in this position where hosepipe bans are essential And you know, the water companies are now rolling the pitch for it.
Yeah, and it's not, I suppose, it's not the sexiest thing for governments to get involved in either, is it? I mean, if it's about, you know, an international kind of governmental inclusion in building reservoirs, it's not like offering the public a brand new motorway that goes from Plymouth to Argyll, you know, in one fell swoop. Here's a hole of water for you. You know, it's not a great seller at the doorstep. You don't win elections on reservoirs.
No, but it's essential, isn't it? We all get up in the morning, we put the kettle on, we use the water, we have a wash. It's there. I think to some degree we sometimes take it for granted, and then when these stories do emerge about hosepipe bans or where they've been dumping sewage at sea, we're absolutely infuriated by it because we just don't seem to be learning any of the lessons. And we're told repeatedly, year upon year, that all this money, the increases in our bills, are going to improve the infrastructure that we've got, and yet each year I don't think we see a huge amount of improvement.
So we're going to be in that territory fairly soon where water bills, you know, begin to look like council tax bills, you know, where you're in the kind of, rather than the sort of, you know, £40–50 a month territory, we're heading towards the £200 a month mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look back over the figures for the last 5 to 10 years, you'll see that water bills have just continuously risen, and they will continue to rise. And the explanation to the punter in the street is we need to invest in new infrastructure to make things easier for you, but we won't feel those benefits, I think, for probably a generation or so. It's going to take a long time, and in the meantime, each summer that we will come to this point where the water companies will prepare us for the fact that there'll be a hosepipe ban. And with the summer expected to be long and hot, twice as likely as normal, I think it's only a matter of time before the big firms start putting out advice towards punters to say, please start using a shower instead of a bath. Please don't use it at peak times. And then at some stage there'll be a hosepipe ban. And if you look at the Northwest already, they are currently in drought conditions.
Wow. Very thorough stuff, Paul. Really appreciate your time on this. I know Paul's done some great work. Paul Sims, senior news reporter over there at The Sun. Thank you to him. We're in that territory, aren't we? When you used to work out your monthly outgoings, the water rates, as they were once called, were kind of like, they were there, but they were almost the least of your problems. I mean, there was a time when your gas and your electricity was, you know, 20–30 quid a month each, and everything was tickety-boo. Now we're in the hundreds territory on that one, and water similarly, which is crazy. And we've just had a water leak somewhere, yet to be fully established, being repaired in a couple of weeks, but our bill went through the roof, and we didn't at first notice it until you get you get the bill twice a year round our neck of the woods. It's not a monthly bill, it's a monthly payment, but the bill twice. And it said something on the lines of, you know, you're using, you know, if you've noticed at the bottom of your bill, it says, it tells you how your water usage compares to the neighbours. Have you seen that? You don't normally look at it, but there it is. And it will tell you what kind of user you are, light user, medium, heavy. And it said something like you are one of the heavier users, the equivalent of a family of 9. I mean, what are we, the Waltons or something? The equivalent of a family of 9 heavy users. So not just a family of 9, but a family of 9 that were using a lot of water. Now you'd think, if you're the water company and a bill shoots up by 328% in a month, wouldn't they contact you to go, like the bank does if there's an erroneous activity on your bank account, they call you or text you, did you make this transaction? Text Y or N, and we can take it from there. No, absolutely nothing. We had to alert them, and of course, because it's water, unless that repair is on their bit, which is like about 1 inch, then you have to cop the cost of it. Still trying to establish it fully. Tony is in Spain on water, where there's loads of water, and I'm not talking about coming out the clouds. Seems to be everywhere in Spain. No trouble spraying the lawn over your neck of the woods, Tony.
No, there is no trouble, and you're right. And I listen to your various shows on a daily basis, and they're very good. But what I've noticed the last few days particularly, you're talking about this water crisis. So, and it's been put down to migration and climate change. Now, what you are all missing massively is data centers. Data centers consume billions of gallons of water, of drinking water, per day.
Somebody told me, sorry to interrupt, somebody told me that every question you ask AI, whether it's chat, whether it's Grok, whatever it is, takes half a litre of water.
You're right. That is a fact. So every time you go to, we call it an instance. You go into ChatGPT, it's called an instance. So you're having a chat with it, and it costs half a litre of water. And I would emphasise half a litre of drinking water.
Right. So this isn't just any old took from the sea. This is stuff that's ready to go.
And here's more of an irony. This morning I looked at the news and I saw that KKR, the private equity company, has pulled out of the deal with Thames Water. Here's the irony that nobody knows. KKR owns Cool IT, which is the biggest water cooling company in the data center world.
Wow.
The biggest. Yes. KKR, Cool IT.
Why are we... I mean, there's so many things we could talk about here. It's a shame we haven't got a glass of wine to do this, because it's such an interesting area. I mean, data centres, you know, they're building almost the size of Brooklyn, these things, and that's just the Facebook one.
There are 500 in the UK, and plans to build 200 more.
So who's building them? I mean, are these like Meta and others?
Yes, it is. Meta, Google, Amazon, yes. All of the...
500 in the UK?
Existing, yes. And they are disguised. You would not be... If you drive down the M40, you look over to your right, you look up to your left, and you see these big buildings. They are data centres.
What do they look like? You say they just look like big Amazon warehouses or something?
Yes, they do. Yeah, they look exactly like that.
Yeah.
I'm working on a number... I mean, I'm in the industry, so that's why I know what I'm talking about.
I guess, yeah.
And they are kidding the British public. It's not... Yes, immigration, and yes, climate change. They obviously have an impact.
Yeah.
But the biggest single reason, and let me go further, is the fact that they use water to cool down the processes, because the second most expensive aspect of running a data center is cooling it. The first is the processes, the second is cooling it.
So we are using millions of tons of water to achieve this.
And there are different ways to do it. This is what I'm saying. You can use what's known as a dielectric fluid.
Yep.
So you don't have to use water, but the industry is ignoring it. Why? Because water is cheap.
Yeah, and clearly planning permission is easy as well if you're somebody who wants to build a big data centre, which is another takeaway from this conversation. I love it. Tony, keep in touch. Let's talk more on this. It's a fascinating... We've never really gone there on data centres. All I know is these things are, you know, can be the size of collectively the size of a city almost. And they've, I won't quite say sprung out of nowhere, but you think, hang on, you're doing that in every... If you look at all the to-ing and fro-ing and the difficulties in getting infrastructure of any kind built, it not only has to jump through God knows how many hoops and over so many hurdles, and then there's planning permission, but we've had 500 data centres pop up. It's got to be, what, in the last couple of years, I would say. Acres and acres of data centres. Acres. Hundreds, thousands of acres across the world, millions of acres. Every country has got them. What's going on? 0344 499 1000. Now, on a lighter note, we're giving you a chance to win something rather special. FIFA Club World Cup final tickets. Hardly gets any bigger in the world of football. Thanks to our friends at DAZN. Here's everything you need to know.
Hi, it's Jim White here. Here at talkSPORT, we're gearing up for the Club World Cup in the United States. And to celebrate, we've got 2 tickets to the final in New York on July the 13th to give away. We'll sort flights, accommodation, and give you $5,000 spending money to spend however you like. 18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. All you have to do to enter is text the word football. to 83338 by the 13th of June at 11 p.m. and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or send your name and number by post to Club World Cup Final Prize Draw, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on June the 18th.
This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
The French police will now be able to catch these people in shallow water. I can't go on anymore. It is above my penis. What am I to do? I mean, what an absurd ruling. What an absurd ruling. You know?
It's just ridiculous. Yeah, but for 2 years and 3 months, they've been watching the migrant, waving them goodbye, because they've got a law that bans them from paddling in the sea.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk coming up on blimey, is it 5 to 4? How did that happen? George is in Dundee. How you doing, George?
I'm doing great, my friend. Great show as usual.
Thank you.
A couple of points. First of all, you had a lady contributor on saying that the problem was everybody was called British. Please, don't take my... I am Dundonian British. Dundonian British. The SNP took my Scottishness off me 15 years ago. I don't want to lose my Britishness.
They took a lot off you 15 years ago, didn't they, as well? Yeah. Plus half your money.
As a no voter, a Brexit voter, and somebody that doesn't walk about having a sign saying refugees are welcome here, I'm not Scottish, apparently. But anyway.
Ah, right, of course, yes. You've diluted your identity.
despite the accent. The second thing is on the changes in the UK. As somebody who's got friends that come from Hong Kong, Holland, Poland, and India, right? I don't think the colour of skin is irrelevant, right? We could do with more dark-skinned people in Peely Valley, Scotland land, but the colour of skin is irrelevant. Cultural, slightly different, but I think the main problem that if you took a vote in Britain, it would be the fear of Britain becoming more of an Islamic country and Islamic laws.
If people in power were representing that faith, then inevitably they would be agitating for that. If they were, depending on who it is, of course, you know, there are plenty of Muslim MPs who've not tried to introduce elements of their own or parts of their own cultural and religious thinking into policy or agitated for it. But I take that point. To me, what would be terrible, George, is if I went to Dundee and I didn't feel like I was in Dundee. I want to feel, if I go to Dundee, I want to feel like I'm in Dundee.
What I want to feel in Britain, and always feel in Britain, if you are gay, you can be openly gay. A woman wants to wear a dress showing a bit of ankle, she's free. If I want to say I believe there is no God, it's in your imagination, I want to be free to say that.
Absolutely spot on. George, I have to step in because we have literally hit the clock.
Oh, shut.
Oh, so what?
Hello.
Nearly. Jeremy Kyle has pitched up.
How are you?
Good.
Lots to talk about today, but I'm going to cut to the chase. We can talk about France saying they're going to stop the boats. We can talk about police chiefs warning Starmer about stark choices. We can talk about winter fuel payments. But the big news of the day, ladies and gentlemen, and we've put some creativity into this.
I can't wait for this.
Pope Leo, the whatever he is, has declared war on the dangers of AI. Have you heard about this?
Go on.
Making it his mission to tackle the risks posed by runaway technology. In a powerful address to cardinals, he warned that AI could threaten human dignity, justice and jobs.
Did he say that?
So we put Jeremy Kyle, AI sermon, as the Pope into AI, and I've got it, baby. And the first line is, listen here, I'm not here to sugarcoat it. Sin's real. Deal with it, OK? We've got the whole thing. It's genius.
I love it. And do you know what? I said earlier to a previous guest, I like that Pope, this new one, because he's an American, isn't he?
Yes.
He's the only Pope we've ever seen who starts off one of those sermons in St. Peter's Square with, how you doing?
How you doing down there?
That's how we want a Pope.
That's what we want as a Pope. How are you? I hear you had that Vince, what's it on? Is it Dale Vince?
We had Dale Vince on. Loves you, by the way. Big fan of yours.
Does he?
Always been a big fan.
I'm not a big fan of the net zero rubbish.
James Cleverly is
What I have in common with him is we both gave away quite the same amount of money to our ex-wives.
I was about to say, you should be out drinking together, you and Dale.
Yeah, Dale's a good lad, bless his heart.
That much,
Are you all right? Have you had a good day?
Yes, we've been good. But
your wire's been sticking out of your ear.
Yeah, it was because I took it off a second ago and it's all gone a bit wonky.
Nearly.
Whoa! Whoa! What's happening to us today? AI is really interesting. Data centres.